Today, we delve into the tranquil surroundings of Monterey, California, a locale renowned for its breathtaking coastal views and rich cultural history. The community was shaken to its core when the body of a 21-year-old was discovered under troubling and mysterious circumstances. This is the story of a young groom, a 58-year-old wealthy art collector, and a marriage that ended in tragedy. Jack Thompson was a 21-year-old with a quiet disposition, born and raised in the picturesque town of Carmel by the Sea, just outside Monterey. Jack had recently completed his training as a chef in May 2022, known among his peers as the reserved one who was always experimenting with new recipes. While his friends were advancing in their culinary careers, Jack was still unsure of his path in the culinary world. He dreamed of one day owning his own restaurant, but he was uncertain about how to make his dreams a reality. Jack lived with his mother, Martha Thompson, in a modest home on the outskirts of town. Their financial situation was dire. Martha, a single mother, had struggled to keep them afloat, especially after a series of business failures left them in debt. The weight of their financial troubles bore heavily on Jack, who felt a strong obligation to support his mother. Despite his introverted nature, Jack was deeply compassionate, always willing to help others even as he faced his own challenges. In the week leading up to his untimely death, Jack found himself in an extraordinary situation. He had unexpectedly married Veronica Steele, a 58-year-old renowned art collector, known for her lavish lifestyle and multiple previous marriages. Veronica insisted on an extravagant wedding held at a stunning cliffside estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Big Sur. The event was opulent, with luxurious decorations, a gourmet menu, and a custom-made designer gown for Veronica. However, Jack appeared uncomfortable throughout the celebration. He looked anxious and unsure about the drastic turn his life had taken. The sudden announcement of his marriage to the much older Veronica Steele shocked everyone who knew him. Many speculated that his decision was influenced by his mother's financial difficulties, while others feared he might be under undue pressure. Jack's relationship with Veronica was strained not only by their significant age difference, but also by Veronica's controlling personality. She was notorious for her temper tantrums when things didn't go her way, leaving Jack increasingly overwhelmed by her behavior. He confided his worries and fears to his mother, but Martha urged him to stay in the marriage, believing it could secure their financial future. As a result, Jack felt trapped, caught between his mother's expectations and his growing discomfort with his new life. At the time of his death, Jack was still struggling to adjust to his changed circumstance. He had withdrawn from his friends and spent most of his time in the luxurious home he now shared with Veronica. His dream of becoming a successful chef seemed more out of reach than ever. He was a young man who had lost his direction, struggling to imagine a future that felt truly his own. On the morning of August 8, 2022, the peaceful atmosphere of Monterey was shattered by a disturbing discovery. At 8:30 a.m., Doris Miller, a 78-year-old neighbor, was on her regular morning walk when she noticed something strange at the cliffside estate of Veronica Steele Thompson. The curtains were tightly drawn, and the front door was slightly ajar. Doris, who had cherished the tranquility of the neighborhood for over 3 decades, found this unusual, especially since Veronica was known for her meticulous habits and always kept everything in perfect order. Driven by curiosity and concern, Doris decided to investigate. As she approached the house, she called out but received no reply. Hesitantly, she stepped inside and was immediately hit by a strong, acrid odor. It was then that she discovered Jack Thompson lying motionless on the living room floor. His body was slumped over the sofa, surrounded by several empty prescription bottles. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table beside him. Doris stood frozen, her heart pounding. She knew Jack and could barely comprehend the scene in front of her. As tears welled up in her eyes, she quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she gave the address and described the grim scene. When the 911 operator asked her to check for signs of life, Doris hesitated but then cautiously approached Jack. She knelt beside him and gently shook his shoulder, calling his name. There was no response. His skin was pale, his lips faintly blue, and there were no signs of breathing. Doris's mind raced back to the wedding just a week earlier, where Jack had looked so out of place next to the much older Veronica in her extravagant bridal gown. She struggled to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. With tears streaming down her face, Doris stayed on the line with the 911 operator until the police and paramedics arrived. The authorities soon confirmed Jack's death at the scene. Doris, shaken and heartbroken, was escorted outside, where she sat on the curb, staring blankly at the estate where Jack's promising life had met a tragic end. The police arrived at the Steele-Thompson residence just before 9 a.m. on August 8, 2022. The investigation was led by Detective Michael Harris, a seasoned detective with the Monterey Police Department, known for his sharp intuition and straightforward approach. Detective Harris wasted no time in examining the scene. Accompanied by Officer Mark Davis, an eager young officer, they entered the home that had now become the center of a tragic mystery. The living room, where Jack's body was discovered, was eerily quiet. The elegant furniture and sophisticated decor stood in stark contrast to the lifeless figure on the floor. Detective Harris immediately noticed the scattered empty pill bottles and the glass of water on the coffee table. He examined the labels, prescriptions for medications like Xanax and OxyContin, drugs commonly associated with overdose cases. The scene was unnervingly orderly. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood. The extreme tidiness suggested that whatever had happened wasn't a chaotic, spur-of-the-moment event, but something much more deliberate. Detective Harris instructed Officer Davis to begin photographing the scene, while he called in a forensics team to dust for fingerprints and gather evidence. The medical examiner, Dr. Evelyn Hahn, arrived shortly thereafter to examine the body. She confirmed that Jack had likely died from an overdose, but the amount of drugs present, far above therapeutic levels, indicated that it wasn't accidental. As they dug deeper into the investigation, Detective Harris's attention was drawn to a small but telling detail: a wedding photograph of Jack and Veronica on the mantel. In the photo, Jack's expression was subdued, his eyes downcast, a stark contrast to Veronica's bright, confident smile. This subtle detail suggested that everything was not as harmonious in this newly united household as it appeared. The forensic team meticulously collected the pill bottles, the glass of water, and any other pertinent evidence. They also detected a faint scent of perfume in the air, which Detective Harris recognized as Veronica's signature fragrance, a high-end scent from Chanel No. 5. By the time the initial examination was complete, Detective Harris was increasingly convinced that this case was more than just an overdose. The evidence pointed to foul play, and the investigation was just beginning. As they delved further into Jack Thompson's death, suspicion naturally fell on the most likely suspect, Veronica Steele-Thompson, Jack's 58-year-old wife. Veronica was a well-known figure in Monterey, famous for her lavish lifestyle and domineering personality. Coming from a wealthy background, Veronica had been through multiple marriages, each ending in bitterness. Known for her obsession with preserving her youth and her tendency to lash out when things didn't go her way, Veronica's demanding nature had earned her a reputation for perfectionism. When Detective Harris and Officer Davis visited Veronica's home later that day, they found her lounging nonchalantly by the pool, just yards from where her husband had died, casually sipping a mimosa and flipping through the latest issue of Vogue. Despite the grim circumstances, Veronica appeared disturbingly composed. Dressed in a stylish kaftan and oversized sunglasses, she exuded a detached air that immediately caught Detective Harris's attention. Veronica greeted the officers with a superficial smile that didn't reach her eyes. When questioned about the events leading up to Jack's death, she explained that she had gone to bed early the previous night, leaving Jack in the living room to work on some new recipes. She assumed he had fallen asleep on the couch when she didn't find him in their bed the next morning. Upon hearing of his death, her reaction was muted, showing only a mild expression of sorrow, as if she had learned of a distant acquaintance's passing. During the interrogation, Veronica's story remained consistent, but her emotional detachment raised suspicions. She cooperated with the investigators but kept a certain distance, responding with practiced precision. When asked about the medications found at the scene, Veronica mentioned that Jack had been struggling recently and had prescriptions to help with his mental well-being. She claimed to be unaware of any potential for overdose, suggesting that perhaps Jack had taken more pills than intended in a moment of despair. Despite her composed facade, Detective Harris noted several inconsistencies in Veronica's account. For instance, Veronica had claimed that Jack was working on his recipes, yet the TV, which he often used to watch cooking shows for inspiration, was off when Doris Miller found the body. Moreover, The bed in the master bedroom appeared untouched, suggesting that Veronica may not have gone to bed at all. The more Detective Harris examined her statements, the clearer it became that Veronica was hiding something. However, without concrete evidence, the police couldn't detain her. Veronica's alibi seemed airtight, but her demeanor cast a shadow of doubt. As the interrogation concluded, Detective Harris remained uneasy, suspecting that Veronica, with her elegant and confident exterior, was more deeply involved in Jack's death than she was letting on. With Veronica Steele Thompson still under scrutiny, the focus shifted to a second suspect, Martha Thompson, Jack's mother. Martha, at 49, had faced a lifetime of hardships. Her life was marked by poor choices, each seemingly worse than the last. Overwhelmed by crippling debt, Martha had turned to selling prescription drugs in secret, a fact known to only a few. Detective Harris, aware of Martha's past arrests, considered how her dire financial situation might have driven her to push Jack into his ill-fated marriage with Veronica. The union promised financial salvation, too tempting for Martha to ignore. When brought in for questioning, Martha appeared disheveled and anxious. Dressed in faded jeans and a worn t-shirt, she was a stark contrast to Veronica's polished appearance. Martha's hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, a habit she had recently picked up again, and her voice quivered as she answered questions. She admitted to encouraging Jack's marriage to Veronica, describing it as an opportunity too good to pass up. She recalled the wedding at the Grand Big Sur estate, where Jack had looked distinctly uncomfortable amidst the extravagance. Martha insisted she only wanted what was best for her son, that Veronica could provide the financial stability she had failed to achieve herself. However, when the conversation turned to the medications found at the scene, Martha became defensive. She denied any knowledge of the large quantity of pills, claiming that Jack must have obtained them on his own. Yet Detective Harris wasn't convinced. Martha's financial troubles, her illegal drug activities, and her desperation to secure a better future all pointed to her involvement. During the interrogation, Martha's responses grew increasingly inconsistent. She initially claimed she hadn't seen Jack for days, but later contradicted herself by saying she had visited him the night before his death. Her agitation and conflicting statements only deepened the police's suspicion. Despite her denials, Martha's connection to the drugs and her apparent motive to maintain Jack's marriage positioned her as a key suspect. Detective Harris knew that Martha was resourceful, determined, and willing to do whatever it took to protect herself, even if it meant putting her own son at risk. As the interrogation concluded, they were getting closer to the truth, but there were still missing pieces to the puzzle. With both Veronica Steele Thompson and Martha Thompson under investigation, attention turned to a third suspect, Harold Monroe, Veronica's ex-husband. At 70 years old, Harold was a successful real estate mogul known for his ruthless tactics in both business and personal matters. His latest venture involved launching a series of luxury developments along the California coast, a project that had significantly bolstered his financial standing. Harold's marriage to Veronica had ended bitterly just months before she married Jack, and their divorce had become a hot topic in local social circles. Veronica had walked away with a substantial portion of Harold's wealth, which had deeply humiliated and angered him. Jack's sudden marriage to Veronica, a much younger man she had recently met, felt like a direct insult. Harold's lingering resentment and envy made him a key suspect in the ongoing investigation. Detective Harris and Officer Davis decided to question Harold. When they arrived at his sprawling estate, they found him in his study, surrounded by blueprints and real estate contracts. Harold greeted them with a firm handshake, exuding an air of calm and confidence. Unlike Martha, who had appeared nervous and unsettled, Harold was composed and seemed almost prepared for their questions. During the interrogation, Harold was cooperative but carefully measured in his response. He admitted his frustration over Veronica's remarriage, describing it as a deep betrayal. However, he denied any involvement in Jack's death. Harold explained that he had been focused on his business ventures and had kept minimal contact with Veronica or Jack since the divorce. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Jack's death, Harold provided a strong alibi. He had been attending a real estate gala in San Francisco, with numerous prominent individuals able to vouch for his presence, making it difficult for the police to challenge his alibi. Despite his cooperative demeanor, Detective Harris remained suspicious. Harold's overly composed calm felt almost rehearsed, as if he had anticipated their line of questioning. His recent heated exchange with Veronica, witnessed during a high-profile charity event where Harold had ominously warned her that she would regret their divorce, only deepened their suspicions. Although there wasn't enough evidence to detain Harold, his potential motives of jealousy and revenge kept him firmly in the investigative spotlight. The investigation was far from over, and Detective Harris realized they needed to dig deeper to uncover the full truth. On August 15, 2022, just as the case seemed to be hitting a dead end, a crucial new piece of evidence surfaced. It was a mild, sunny afternoon, with clouds beginning to gather over Monterey. Detective Michael Harris was at the station reviewing the case files when Officer Mark Davis rushed in, holding a sealed envelope. It had arrived anonymously at the station that morning, immediately raising suspicion. Inside the envelope was a USB drive. The contents of the drive were shocking. A series of text messages between Veronica Steele Thompson and an unidentified contact, dated just days before Jack's death. The messages outlined Veronica's plan to divorce Jack and disinherit him, using her knowledge of Martha Thompson's illegal drug activities as leverage. The messages revealed Veronica's dissatisfaction with Jack's subdued personality and his lackluster efforts in the kitchen as her spouse, along with her growing eagerness to free herself from the marriage. "His cooking is so uninspired," one message read. "His plating skills are worse than a novice's," another harsh text declared. "If that bleep Martha thinks she can control this bleep, she's gravely mistaken. I'll make sure she and that mediocre bleep chef pay." These texts provided deep insight into Veronica's mindset and intentions. It became clear that she was scheming to rid herself of both Jack and Martha. The messages also hinted at the involvement of a third party, a private investigator Veronica had hired to dig up dirt on Martha's involvement in the illegal drug trade. This investigator had uncovered Martha's history of drug trafficking and was feeding Veronica the information she needed to execute her plan. This revelation painted Veronica as a calculating and vindictive individual, determined to achieve her goals by any means necessary. It also raised significant questions about Martha's role in Jack's death. Was Martha aware of Veronica's plot and acted out of desperation, or was she merely an unwitting pawn in Veronica's elaborate scheme? Armed with this compelling evidence, the police ramped up their investigation into both Veronica and Martha. The case gained renewed momentum as it became evident that the truth was more complex than initially thought. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the full story was still unfolding. On August 20th, 2022, as the investigation reached a critical point, Detective Michael Harris received a breakthrough after analyzing the text messages found on the USB drive and cross-referencing them with phone records. It became clear that Martha Thompson, Jack's own mother, was behind the deadly scheme. Driven by desperation and greed, Martha had used her son as a pawn in her plot. The police now had enough evidence to arrest her. Martha Thompson, 49, was a woman who saw life as a relentless struggle, burdened by debt and haunted by poor decisions. Martha viewed Jack's marriage to Veronica as her ticket out of financial ruin. She feared that Jack, who had shown little interest in women before, would leave Veronica, shattering Martha's hopes for a steady stream of money. To ensure that wouldn't happen, Martha had been secretly giving Jack prescription drugs and sexual enhancers to keep him compliant and performing, but her plan went terribly wrong when Jack accidentally overdosed, taking far more than she had intended. The twist came when it was revealed that Veronica, unsatisfied with Jack's lack of enthusiasm as a husband, had been planning to divorce him and cut both him and Martha out of her life. She had discovered Martha's drug dealings and intended to use that information to keep them out of her money. But Martha, desperate to keep the marriage intact, took matters into her own hands on the night of Jack's death. Martha had given him a stronger dose of the drugs, hoping to calm him down. But Jack, distraught over his loveless marriage and fearful of Veronica's harshness, took even more pills on his own, leading to a fatal overdose. Martha hadn't meant to kill her son, but her actions directly caused his death. When the police confronted Martha with the evidence, she initially denied everything. Her demeanor was panicked and frantic, a stark contrast to her earlier calm. But as Detective Harris laid out the incriminating messages and phone records, Martha's defenses crumbled. She claimed she never intended to kill her son, only to keep him in the marriage until they could secure their financial future. Martha's arrest sent shockwaves through the small community of Monterey. Jack's family was devastated by the revelation that his own mother had caused his death. The community, already shaken by the bizarre circumstances of the marriage, now had to come to terms with the tragic reality that greed and desperation had led to such a senseless loss. As Martha was led away in handcuffs, she appeared numb, unable to fully grasp the gravity of her actions. The community, overwhelmed by grief, expressed their sorrow and disbelief, struggling to accept what had happened. The arrest marked the end of a dark chapter in Monterey's history, but the pain and shock would linger for a long time. Martha Thompson's trial began in early December 2022. The courtroom was packed with reporters from outlets like the Monterey Gazette and True Crime Daily, eager to cover the shocking details of the case. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Mark Christensen, portrayed Martha as a manipulative and desperate woman who had prioritized her financial needs over her son's life. Christensen, known for his sharp intellect and relentless pursuit of justice, argued that Martha's actions were premeditated and driven by greed. He pointed to the text messages, phone records, and Martha's own confession as undeniable proof of her guilt. The defense, led by public defender Carita Vasquez, countered by portraying Martha as a troubled mother who had made a terrible mistake. Vasquez, a seasoned attorney known for her compassion, argued that Martha never intended to kill Jack. She emphasized Martha's financial struggles, her desperation to secure a better future for her family, and the fact that Jack's death was accidental. Vasquez appealed to the jury's sympathy, asking them to consider Martha's difficult circumstances and the pressure she was under. Throughout the trial, Jack's family watched in agony. Martha's actions had torn their family apart, and the pain was clear in their tearful expressions. The prosecution's case was strong, but the defense's argument for leniency resonated with some jurors. On December 15, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. Martha Thompson was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The jury believed that while Martha's actions had led to Jack's death, there wasn't enough evidence to prove that she had intended to kill him. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, with Martha showing little reaction, her face pale and expressionless. The judge sentenced Martha to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient, given the tragic loss of Jack's life, while others believed it was fair considering Martha's desperate circumstances. For Jack's family, the verdict brought little comfort. They were left to grapple with the reality that their loved one was gone, taken by the very person who was supposed to protect him. The town of Monterey, too, was left to process the disturbing events that had unfolded in their midst, a stark reminder of how greed and desperation can lead to unthinkable actions. In the months following Martha Thompson's sentencing, the impact of the case continued to resonate deeply within the Monterey community. The trial had left a lasting mark on everyone involved, from the Thompson family to local residents. Martha Thompson was sent to the California State Prison Complex in Sacramento, a high-security facility located near the capital. In prison, Martha faced a challenging environment. Her case had received significant media attention, and she was often the subject of gossip and judgment from fellow inmates. The prison system offered her limited opportunities for rehabilitation and support, leaving her to reflect on the tragic consequences of her actions. Martha spent her time participating in prison programs aimed at addressing substance abuse and mental health issues, hoping to find some sense of redemption and prepare for her eventual release. Despite the turmoil, life in Monterey gradually returned to normal. The town held a memorial for Jack at a local park, attended by friends, family, and residents who wished to honor his memory. The event featured live music and speeches celebrating Jack's life and dreams. It was a somber reminder of the young man whose life was cut short, and it offered the community a chance to come together and support one another. As for the media coverage of the case, it eventually faded, making way for new stories and developments. However, the impact of Jack's death and the subsequent trial continued to serve as a poignant reminder of the consequences of desperation and greed, affecting everyone who had been touched by the tragic events of August 2022. Today, we delve into a chilling case from Naples, Florida, In January 2005, a young man's dreams were abruptly ended in a scheme fueled by obsession, envy, and an intense longing for youth. Ethan Wright was a 20-year-old college student thriving in Maples, a locale renowned for its lively retirees, seasonal visitors, and the hidden lives of young individuals who cater to them. Ethan was enthusiastic about coffee and aspired to own his own cafe someday. Known among friends for his deep interest in coffee culture, he loved crafting new blends and perfecting his brewing techniques. Ethan was enrolled at a local community college, focusing on business management to pave the way for his cafe dreams. He worked part-time as a barista at a popular local coffee shop, where his innovative creations were starting to get noticed for their unique flavors, often challenging Maple's preference for traditional brews. Ethan was well regarded by his peers, celebrated for his amiable nature, and his knack for making those around him feel at ease. His engaging personality wasn't just a hit with his friends. He also charmed the older clientele at high-end coffee tasting events, where his skills were in high demand. Ethan was bold and spirited, always on the lookout for new connections and adventures in life, love, and especially in coffee. In the days leading up to his tragic end, Ethan was thrilled about a new opportunity to showcase his latest coffee blend at one of Maple's premier events. His excitement was palpable in every discussion with friends and colleagues. He aimed to carve out a name for himself in the bustling cafe scene and saw this event as a breakthrough. Ethan harbored grand ambitions. He dreamed of traveling the world to explore diverse coffee cultures and someday competing in national barista competitions. He even mused about moving to Seattle to immerse himself in its famed coffee scene. Yet, all his aspirations were halted by a sinister plot that unfolded unnoticed. On the morning of January 15, 2005, Maples was just starting to stir under a clear, cool dawn. Around 8 a.m., Ethan Wright's roommate, Alex Reed, sensed that something was amiss. Ethan hadn't left for his early shift at the local coffee shop, which was out of character. Ethan was usually up with the first light, ready to embrace the day. Alex, concerned, tapped on Ethan's bedroom door, but got no reply. Deciding to check, what he discovered would forever be imprinted in his memory. Ethan lay on his bed, motionless, his skin pale and lifeless. The room, typically filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee or experimental blends, was now unsettlingly silent, marked by a faint, distressing odor. No signs of struggle were evident, no furniture appended or items displaced. It appeared as though Ethan had simply drifted off to sleep and never awakened. Shock rooted Alex to the spot as he stared in disbelief. Panic quickly set in. He scrambled for his phone and dialed 911, his voice breaking as he shakily recounted finding his best friend unresponsive. When the paramedics arrived, they confirmed Alex's worst fears. Ethan was dead. Police soon followed, their sirens cutting through the morning quiet, the flashing lights casting eerie shadows inside the modest apartment. The scene felt surreal, the morning's tranquility shattered by the stark reality of death. Alex, overwhelmed by shock, struggled to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. The responding officers gently urged him out to start their inquiry. Later at the police station, he was visibly distraught, unable to fathom the enormity of his loss. Ethan's body was transported to the local medical examiner for an autopsy as the investigation into his enigmatic death commenced. Unbeknownst to all, this was merely the start of a complex, sinister tale. The Naples Police Department responded swiftly to the 911 call from Ethan Wright's apartment on the morning of January 15, 2005. Leading the charge was Detective James McCarthy, a veteran officer known for his thorough investigative skills. The scene at Ethan's apartment was eerily silent. Everything appeared untouched, and Ethan's body lay peacefully, hinting at an unnatural cause of death. As McCarthy and his team entered Ethan's bedroom, the absence of visible violence struck them. No blood, no weapons, no signs of a struggle. Ethan appeared to have simply fallen asleep and not woken up. However, upon closer inspection, Detective McCarthy grew suspicious of more sinister undertone. Ethan's pale complexion and the slight bluish hue around his lips suggested possible poisoning. The team meticulously documented the scene, photographing every detail from the neatly kept bed to the half-drunk cup of coffee on the nightstand. They collected potential evidence, including Dr. Cameron immediately requested a full toxicology report to pinpoint the substance responsible for Ethan's sudden demise. The investigation widened as police questioned Alex Reed, Ethan's roommate, who, though still in shock, provided full cooperation. Alex recounted Ethan's recent activities, highlighting his excitement and Sophia had spent the morning at the restaurant, finalizing preparations for a big dinner service. David had left early, mumbling something about running errands and meeting a friend for coffee. As Sophia drove home, her mind filled with last-minute thoughts about the evening's menu, she decided on a whim to stop by her mother's bookstore for a quick chat. Perhaps a cup of tea and a familiar face would soothe her anxious mind. But as she turned onto the quiet street leading to Maggie's shop, her heart froze. There, tucked away behind the bookstore, was David's car. For a moment, Sophia sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to convince herself there was an innocent reason for his presence. But deep down, she already knew the truth. With trembling legs, Sophia approached her mother's bookstore. The curtains were mostly drawn, but through a small gap, she could see movement inside. Steeling herself with a deep breath, she quietly unlocked the door with her spare key and pushed it open as silently as she could. The scene that met her eyes would be etched in her mind forever. On a cozy, well-worn leather couch, David and Maggie were locked in an intimate embrace, completely unaware of the world outside. Maggie's usually tidy hair was tousled, and David's shirt was partly unbuttoned. On the small coffee table, 2 half-empty cups of tea stood as silent witnesses to their betrayal. For a moment, Sophia felt time stop. Then, as if sensing her presence, David and Maggie looked up, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and something close to defiance. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions and accusation. Sophia's anguished cry shattered the silence, jolting the guilty pair out of their daze. David stumbled to his feet, stammering out half-formed excuses and pleas. Maggie stayed seated, her face drained of color, tears streaking down her cheeks. Sophia, her voice raw with pain and fury, hurled question after question at them. When they finally spoke, the truth cut like a knife. 6 months. It had started as innocent conversations, then slowly turned into something more. They claimed they never intended for it to go this far. They said they were sorry, but Sophia couldn't bear to hear another word. She fled the bookstore, got into her car, and drove aimlessly for hours, the devastating scene replaying in her mind over and over. By the time she returned home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, haunting shadows across the lawn of the house she once thought was her safe haven. As she sat alone in the darkened living room, surrounded by the remnants of her once perfect life, something inside her shattered. The pain, the betrayal, the sheer weight of it all. In that darkness, a cold resolve took shape. Someone had to pay for this betrayal, and Sophia knew exactly who it would be. The events that led to the final confrontation unfolded over the course of several tense hours on that warm summer evening. Sophia, having spent the day drowning in grief and fury, found herself pacing the hallways of her home like a restless spirit. The ticking clock in the living room seemed to taunt her, marking the minutes until everything in her world would change forever. As twilight settled, David returned home. His usual confident stride was replaced with hesitant steps, as though he knew what awaited him. Sophia watched him from the shadows as he hung up his jacket and loosened his tie, the familiar routine now stained by the knowledge of his betrayal. David called out her name, his voice tinged with anxiety. When she finally stepped into view, he visibly recoiled. The woman standing before him was nothing like the vibrant, loving wife he had once known. Sophia's eyes were bloodshot and hollow, her posture stiff with barely suppressed rage. David, his face twisted with guilt and desperation, launched into a flurry of excuses and apologies. He talked about feeling neglected, about the stress of work and the weight of their struggles. He insisted that the affair was a mistake, a lapse in judgment that spiraled out of control. But with every word he spoke, Sophia's anger grew, a storm of rage building within her. Before she knew what she was doing, Sophia found herself walking to David's study. She knew he kept a heavy decorative bookend there, an ornate piece he had picked up from a local shop. In a daze, she grabbed it, feeling its cold weight in her hands. When she returned to the living room, David's eyes widened in fear. He raised his hands, backing away slowly, his voice rising in panic as he promised to end the affair, to go to counseling, to do anything to save their marriage. But Sophia barely registered his word. All she could see was the image of David and Maggie, locked in that embrace, playing in an endless loop in her mind. What happened next was a blur of movement and chaos. David took a step forward, perhaps intending to stop her, But in the rush of heightened emotions, Sophia swung the heavy decorative bookend in her hand. The sickening thud as it connected with David's shoulder echoed through the room, followed by the sound of shattering glass as a framed photo fell from a nearby shelf. David stumbled backward, a look of shock and pain etched on his face. He clutched his shoulder where the impact had left a deep bruise, his white shirt now smeared with blood from a cut caused by the broken glass. Gasping for breath, David's eyes locked onto Sophia's, silently pleading for the woman he once knew. As the reality of what she had done set in, Sophia dropped the bookend. It hit the floor with a dull thud, snapping her out of her trance. Her fury melted away, replaced by sheer horror and regret. She rushed to David's side, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the wound she had inflicted. His breathing was labored, his face drained of color. Fighting back tears, Sophia fumbled for her phone and dialed the emergency number, her voice cracking as she gave the dispatcher the address, begging for an ambulance. While she waited for help, Sophia cradled David's head in her lap, murmuring a desperate mix of apologies and pleas for him to stay with her. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Neighbors, having heard the commotion, began gathering outside. Through the window, Sophia could see their concerned faces morph into expressions of shock as they realized what had happened. She overheard muffled conversations, someone mentioning the police. When the paramedics finally arrived, they moved swiftly to stabilize David. Sophia stood back, numb with disbelief, as they lifted him onto a stretcher and hurried him to the waiting ambulance. The wail of the sirens gradually faded, leaving her standing alone in the silent, tension-filled house, surrounded by the aftermath of her actions. It wasn't long before the police arrived. Detective Carla Reyes took charge of the scene, her sharp eyes scanning every detail as officers cordoned off the area and began collecting evidence. Approaching Sophia, who sat motionless on the stained couch, Detective Reyes spoke in a calm but firm voice, informing Sophia of her rights and asking if she understood what had just occurred. With a voice barely above a whisper, Sophia recounted the day's events, the devastating discovery of the affair, the confrontation, and the moment everything spiraled out of control. Her words were detached, as though she were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. As Sophia was led away and handcuffed, the enormity of the situation began to sink in. She caught glimpses of neighbors peering out from behind curtains, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. At the local hospital, David lay in critical condition, his injury far worse than it initially seemed. The blow had caused significant internal damage, and as he underwent surgery after surgery, friends and colleagues gathered in the waiting room, their whispered conversations filled with shock and speculation. Maggie, overcome with guilt and shame, tried to visit David, but was turned away by the hospital staff at his request. She retreated to her apartment above the bookstore, where she isolated herself, refusing to answer calls or see anyone. The weight of what she had caused left her looking years older, her once lively eyes now hollow and filled with sorrow. Detective Reyes dug deeper into the events that led up to that fateful night. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members, piecing together the tangled web of relationships and secrets that had unraveled so violently. The more she learned about the Chambers family's strained history and the affair between David and Maggie, the more complicated the case became. As the investigation moved forward, the town of Seabrook found itself divided. What initially seemed like a straightforward case of assault in a fit of rage was now viewed as a tragic consequence of betrayal and broken trust. Some residents felt sympathy for Sophia's situation, while others condemned her actions as unforgivable, no matter the circumstances. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source. Sophia's close friend and fellow chef, Lisa, stepped forward with a series of text messages. In the weeks leading up to the confrontation, Sophia had confided in Lisa about her growing suspicions, sharing the signs of infidelity she had noticed. The messages revealed Sophia's emotional turmoil and her struggle to accept the truth, providing valuable insight into her mental state leading up to the incident. Inside the packed courtroom, tension hung in the air as the judge called the proceedings to order. The prosecution, led by the ambitious district attorney Vincent Harding, portrayed Sophia as a vengeful woman who had committed a premeditated act of violence. Harding argued that the assault was not a crime of passion, but a calculated attempt to punish both her husband and her mother for their betrayal. Sophia's defense attorney, Carla Morales, presented a different narrative. She painted Sophia as a victim of unbearable circumstances, a woman pushed to the edge by a betrayal that shattered her world. Morales emphasized Sophia's impeccable reputation, her dedication to her community, and the extreme emotional distress she had been under when she lashed out. In their closing statements, both sides made passionate appeals to the jury. Harding focused on the severity of the crime and the need for justice, while Morales urged the jury to consider the extraordinary situation and Sophia's otherwise exemplary life. As the jury left to deliberate, a hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Sophia Reynolds now rested in their hands, and with it, the resolution of a tragedy that had rocked the quiet town of Seabrook. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Sophia Reynolds guilty of aggravated assault, a lesser charge than the attempted murder the prosecution sought. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of gasps and murmurs as the verdict was read, with Sophia standing quietly beside her attorney. The judge, considering Sophia's unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Additionally, Sophia was required to undergo psychological counseling and complete an anger management program. The sentence drew mixed reactions. Some believed it was too lenient given the harm caused, while others felt it was a fair balance of justice and empathy. As Sophia was led away from the courtroom, the gravity of her actions and the long road ahead seemed to settle on her shoulder. David, having recovered from his injuries but forever changed by the experience, moved to a different state to start fresh. He and Sophia divorced during her incarceration, their communication limited to formal letters and rare phone calls. Despite the hurt and pain, there was a fragile sense of forgiveness between them, born of mutual understanding and regret. Maggie retreated from public life entirely. She lived in near isolation, only occasionally visited by a health aide. The burden of her role in the tragedy drained her vitality, leaving her a shadow of her former self. As Seabrook slowly healed and life moved forward, the story of Sophia, David, and Maggie became a sobering reminder of how quickly and irreversibly lives can unravel. It compels us to examine our own relationships, to value the trust we share with loved ones, and to reflect on the lasting consequences of the choices we make. In the mountain town of Crestwood, the tale of two sisters, Elena and Isabel Morrison, unravels, a story woven with affection, rivalry, and unresolved tensions. Elena, the elder, was the embodiment of virtue, compassionate, accomplished, and married to Nathan Carter, a celebrated chef who owned a popular gourmet restaurant. Their union was admired throughout Crestwood, epitomizing an idyllic love story. Elena and Isabel were raised in a modest home. Their parents were local artisans known for their craftsmanship. From a young age, it was evident that the sisters were distinctly different. Elena was always composed and courteous, earning the pride of her parents. She excelled academically and was well-liked throughout Crestwood. It seemed destined that she would lead a significant life, settle down, and start a family. Isabel, in contrast, was vibrant and often unpredictable. Equally intelligent, she was recognized for her adventurous spirit and occasional defiance. As they matured, their paths diverged further. Elena pursued a career in education, while Isabel experimented with various occupations but never settled on one. When Isabel returned to Crestwood, her charismatic influence was more noticeable than ever. She had a knack for navigating out of tricky situations and often used her charm to achieve her desires. Her romantic endeavors were intense yet fleeting. She thrived on the initial thrill but quickly grew restless, leaving a trail of wounded hearts, which only enhanced her reputation as the unpredictable sister. After completing her studies, Elena returned to Crestwood and immediately caught the attention of Nathan Carter. He had come to Crestwood to launch his restaurant and was captivated by both the town's charm and Elena. Their romance blossomed swiftly, leading to a picturesque wedding celebrated by all. Nathan's venture flourished, and they settled into a charming home amidst the mountains. A seemingly perfect life, yet the facade of perfection occasionally cracked. Elena, always meeting others' expectations, began to yearn for more. She had shelved her dreams of travel and new experiences to support Nathan's culinary ambitions and their life in Crestwood. Nathan, while successful, sometimes felt the weight of his responsibilities and the constraints of their serene life. He adored Elena deeply, but occasionally felt stifled by the need to maintain an impeccable image. Into this complex dynamic, Isabel returned to Crestwood, claiming a desire to reconnect with her roots after years of city hopping. In truth, she was fleeing a broken relationship and mounting debts. Despite their differences, Elena welcomed Isabel with open arms, offering her sanctuary as she figured out her next steps. This gesture highlighted the enduring connection between the sisters, despite the divergent roads they had traveled. As Isabel settled into life at Nathan's gourmet restaurant in Crestwood, the dynamics among the three of them began to subtly yet significantly shift, setting the stage for a drama that would shake Crestwood to its core, forever altering their lives. Initially, Isabel's presence seemed to rejuvenate Nathan and Elena's relationship. Their evenings were filled with laughter and shared memories as the sisters reconnected, and Nathan played the role of the attentive husband and brother-in-law. However, as days turned into weeks, Isabel's true intentions began to surface. Her gaze lingered on Nathan a little too long. Her casual touches became more frequent and deliberate. She found reasons to be alone with him, asking for help with culinary techniques, seeking advice on photo shoots, or just catching him alone in the kitchen late at night after Elena had retired. Nathan, initially oblivious to Isabel's advances, found himself increasingly enchanted by her vibrant personality. Unlike Elena, who was steady and dependable, Isabel was spontaneous and exhilarating. She listened intently to his ideas for new dishes and restaurant expansions, asking insightful questions that made him feel truly appreciated. In those moments, Nathan felt a surge of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. Nathan was a man of integrity, dedicated to his wife and the life they had built. He tried to keep his distance from Isabel, finding reasons to immerse himself in his work or to take on extra culinary challenges that kept him away from home. But Isabel was persistent. She recognized the inner conflict in Nathan's eyes and saw it as an opportunity rather than a barrier. She began to weave a careful web of seduction, playing on his uncertainties and unfulfilled aspirations. One evening, while Elena was at a school board meeting, Isabel orchestrated what appeared to be an innocent dinner with Nathan. She prepared his favorite meal, opened a bottle of exquisite wine, and created an intimate setting that was hard to resist. As they talked deep into the night, Isabel skillfully steered the conversation towards Nathan's dreams and passions, areas where she knew Elena had not fully connected with him. Nathan felt a mix of flattery, desire, and overwhelming guilt. He stumbled over his words, trying to steer the conversation back to safer topics, but Isabel had already sensed her advantage. She leaned in closer, her hand brushing his. "Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to be truly understood? To be with someone who sees you for who you really are?" The tension in the room was palpable. Nathan knew he should leave, should end this precarious flirtation before it escalated, but he felt paralyzed, unable to detach from Isabel's allure. As Isabel kissed him passionately, Nathan's resistance crumbled. In that moment, the foundation of his marriage began to reveal cracks, setting off a chain of events that would lead to a profound tragedy. The weeks following that fateful night transformed into a whirlwind of clandestine encounters and escalating guilt for Nathan. What began as a momentary lapse evolved into a full-blown affair, with Nathan and Isabel devising clever ways to meet without Elena finding out. Their rendezvous ranged from brief encounters in the back rooms of the restaurant to well-orchestrated trips under the pretense of culinary research, far from the prying eyes of Crestwood. Isabel reveled in the thrill of their secret relationship, each meeting fueling her sense of triumph over her sister. For Nathan, the affair was a blend of excitement and self-reproach, leaving him exhilarated yet filled with remorse after each encounter. Isabel, adept in manipulation, knew precisely how to keep Nathan ensnared. She played the ideal companion, oscillating between being a passionate lover and a compassionate listener. She attended to his frustrations about his career and the aspirations he had yet to fulfill, providing the understanding and support he craved. "I've never met anyone like you, Nathan," she would whisper during their intimate moments. "You deserve so much more than this quiet life here." Her words were carefully crafted to instill seeds of discontent in Nathan's mind about his life with Elena. She conjured visions of a future brimming with excitement and freedom, free from the constraints of small-town expectations. Nathan found himself increasingly torn between his growing feelings for Isabel and his loyalty to Elena. The strain of leading a double life began to manifest in mood swings, and unusual behavior that Elena could not ignore. At home, Nathan's guilt was evident through his alternating distance and excessive affection, as if trying to compensate for something. He immersed himself deeper into his culinary projects, taking on more initiatives than ever, using his restaurant as both a diversion and an alibi for his frequent absences. Isabel, for her part, maintained the facade of the attentive sister-in-law flawlessly. She would engage Elena in lengthy discussions, feigning interest in her day-to-day concerns while secretly reveling in her duplicity. Occasionally, a glimmer of guilt would cross Isabel's face, a brief recognition of the pain she was inflicting upon her sister. But these moments were fleeting and quickly suppressed by her desire for Nathan and her deep-seated ambition to outshine Elena. As their affair deepened, Nathan and Isabel began taking greater risks. They started meeting in more public spots around Crestwood, driven by their mutual attraction and becoming less cautious of the potential consequences. There were close calls. A restaurant patron nearly saw them together, and a local friend of Elena's spotted them at a cafe in a nearby village. Each brush with exposure only intensified their connection, making the risks seem like part of the excitement. But as the weeks turned into months, the stress of their secret started to take its toll. Nathan, who had once found the affair exhilarating, now felt perpetually tense. His guilt was overwhelming, affecting both his professional life and his personal relationships. He began to wonder if his feelings for Isabel were worth jeopardizing everything he had built with Elena. Isabel, sensing Nathan's inner conflict, intensified her efforts to keep him close. She demanded more of his time and became more vocal about her feeling. Her tactics grew more blatant, preying on his guilt and desires simultaneously. As the affair escalated to its peak, neither Nathan nor Isabel realized that their fragile web of lies was about to unravel. Meanwhile, Elena, unsuspecting at first, started noticing subtle changes. A strange new perfume on Nathan's clothes, secretive phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, and a growing emotional distance that was hard to ignore. Ironically, it was Isabel who became Elena's confidant during this period, offering comfort and reassurances that only deepened the betrayal. As time passed, Elena could no longer dismiss the doubts creeping into her mind. She became more vigilant about the inconsistencies in Nathan's explanations about late nights at the restaurant and supposed supplier meetings. She noticed Isabel's lingering looks at Nathan, the barely hidden desire in her eyes. One day, while sorting laundry, Elena found a matchbook from a bed and breakfast in a neighboring village. An inn she knew was not on any of Nathan's travel routes. The discovery sent a cold shock through her, confirming her worst fears. Torn between confronting the truth and fearing what it might reveal, Elena became consumed with anxiety. She withdrew from her social circles, unable to discuss her suspicions without making them feel more real. Her nights were restless, filled with unsettling dreams, and she found herself observing Nathan and Isabel closely, looking for any clue that might confirm her suspicions. In a moment of desperation, Elena thought about hiring a private investigator, but decided against inviting strangers into their private affairs. Instead, she resolved to confront Nathan and Isabel individually, hoping to pressure one of them into confessing. Little did she know, this decision would trigger a chain of events that would lead to a confrontation more catastrophic than she could have imagined, permanently altering their lives. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy late autumn afternoon. Elena had spent the morning steeling herself for this confrontation, rehearsing her words, determined to remain composed despite the impending heartbreak. When Nathan walked in, shaking rain from his coat, he was met by the sight of his wife standing in the room, her expression a mask of barely contained emotions. The tension was palpable, and he immediately sensed that their carefully maintained facade was about to crumble. "We need to talk," Elena began, her voice quivering slightly despite her best efforts. "I know about you and Isabel." Nathan's face drained of color, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for words. In that quiet moment of shock, Elena saw the truth plainly written on his face, and her last shred of hope evaporated. "How long?" she demanded, her voice rising. "How long have you been seeing my sister?" Nathan's shoulders slumped in defeat, realizing there was no point in denying it any longer. "Elena, I'm so sorry. It just happened." Elena interrupted him with a bitter laugh. "You never meant to? What, did you just stumble into her bed? How could you do this?" Her pent-up anger and hurt burst forth, filling the house with her loud accusations and questions. Nathan could only stand there, absorbing her fury, his weak apologies doing nothing to stem the tide of her wrath. As their argument reached its peak, The front door opened and Isabel stepped in, stopping short at the explosive scene. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen, caught in a tableau of betrayal and guilt. "Isabel, how timely of you to join us. We were just discussing your affair with my husband." Isabel's eyes darted between Elena and Nathan, her mind scrambling for an exit. Nathan, caught between the two sisters, tried to intervene. "Please, let's just calm down and talk about this rationally." His plea only redirected Elena's fury. In a burst of anger, Elena grabbed a vase from the coffee table and hurled it across the room, narrowly missing Nathan. It shattered against the wall, punctuating her word. The noise seemed to jolt Isabel from her defiant stand. For the first time, a flicker of remorse crossed her face. Nathan and Isabel exchanged a look of helpless guilt before slowly making their way to the door. As it closed behind them, Elena collapsed onto the sofa, her body racked with sobs. The life she had cherished, the future she had envisioned, had crumbled in just a few moments. Outside, as the storm raged on, Elena's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, shame, betrayal, and a deep sense of loss. In that moment, she made a decision that would set in motion the final tragic act of their saga. The bartender, Hank, a seasoned observer of the Crestwood locals, watched with concern as Elena downed one drink after another. He had seen many patrons drown their sorrows at Crestwood Tavern, but the wild look in Elena's eyes tonight was especially troubling. "Another," Elena slurred, her gaze intense. Hank hesitated, but the determination in her eyes compelled him to comply. He poured another whiskey, neat, silently hoping it would be her last for the evening. As the night progressed, the tavern emptied, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and her drinks. The alcohol dulled the acute pain of betrayal, replacing it with a chilling resolve. Around midnight, Hank suggested it might be time for her to head home. "Need me to call you a cab, miss?" he asked. Elena waved him off, clumsily rummaging through her purse for her car keys. "I'm fine," she insisted. "I just need to get out of here." Hank tried to intervene, but Elena was already staggering toward the door. She managed to start her car in the deserted parking lot, its engine breaking the silence of the night. She drove off, her vision blurred and reactions sluggish, navigating the winding mountain roads that lay ahead. As she drove, Elena's mind was a whirl of emotions: anger at Nathan and Isabel's betrayal, shame for not having seen the signs sooner, fear of what lay ahead. Her speed increased as she took on the perilous curves of Mountain Pass. Then, disaster struck. Her dulled reflexes couldn't handle a sharp turn. The tires screeched and the car began to slide. In a moment of terrifying clarity, Elena realized her mistake, but it was too late. The guardrail gave way with a horrific noise, and suddenly her car was airborne, plummeting toward the rocky terrain below. At dawn, Officer Liam Murphy received a distressing call. A hiker had discovered a wrecked car at the base of Mountain Pass, a notoriously dangerous stretch. With a heavy heart, Murphy approached the scene, dreading what he might find. The car was a mangled mess, barely recognizable after the violent crash. As the rescue team worked to retrieve the vehicle, Murphy began the grim task of the investigation. The license plate, miraculously intact, identified the vehicle as belonging to Elena Morrison. Murphy's heart sank. He knew Elena well, as did everyone in Crestwood. The burden of delivering such news to her family was immense. As the morning unfolded and the extent of the tragedy became evident, whispers spread throughout the town. Elena Morrison, known for her sensibility and dedication, had died in what appeared to be a tragic accident caused by drunk driving, a stark contrast to the woman everyone thought they knew. Detective Sarah Watson, brought in from the nearby city to lead the investigation, immediately sensed discrepancies in the case. Her keen eye noticed details that seemed off. The absence of skid marks on the mountain road suggested no attempt to brake, the odd angle of the car's descent off the cliff, and the reports of Elena drinking alone, which her friends adamantly claimed was out of character. Upon arriving at the Carter residence to deliver the grim news, Watson felt the tension thick in the air. Nathan Carter's reaction to his wife's death was subdued and seemed tinged with guilt, while Isabel Morrison's presence in the house at such an early hour raised immediate red flags. In the days that followed, Detective Watson dove deep into the investigation, peeling back the tranquil facade of Crestwood to reveal the underlying tensions. Her first stop was the Crestwood Tavern, where she spoke with the bartender, Hank. Hank recounted Elena's state on the last night of her life, describing how she had been heavily drinking. She was knocking him back like there was no tomorrow, he confessed, his expression marked by regret. I tried to stop her from driving. This account starkly contrasted with the description of Elena by her friends and colleagues, who knew her as cautious and responsible, not one to recklessly drink and drive. Watson's suspicions deepened. Watson next focused her attention on Nathan and Isabel. Their behavior post-Elena's death was peculiar. Rather than mourning separately, they appeared to find comfort in each other's company, exchanging meaningful glances and ceasing conversations abruptly when others approached. A significant breakthrough came when Watson interviewed Elena's close friend, Olivia Chun. Initially reluctant to speak ill of the deceased or add to the family's grief, Olivia eventually opened up under Watson's empathetic questioning. Elena had confided in me just days before it happened, Olivia disclosed, her voice trembling. She suspected Nathan was having an affair with Isabel. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light, prompting Detective Watson to delve deeper into the relationship and secrets that might have led to the tragic events of that fateful night. This confession illuminated the entire case for Detective Watson. She wasted no time in verifying the details, delving into Nathan and Isabel's recent actions. Bank statements revealed suspicious transactions, hotel bookings, and costly gifts that coincided with Nathan's supposed supplier meetings. As evidence mounted, Watson summoned Nathan and Isabel for separate interrogation. Under her rigorous questioning, their concocted stories began to unravel. Isabel was the first to break. Yes, we were having an affair, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. Elena found out that night. We had a massive argument, the three of us, but I swear we didn't realize she had left the house afterward. Confronted with Isabel's admission, Nathan also confessed to the affair but vehemently denied any role in Elena's tragic death. We made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice heavy with regret. But I loved Elena. I would never have wanted this to happen. Watson believed their claims that they hadn't directly caused Elena's death, but she understood that their actions had set the catastrophic sequence of events in motion. Her report painted a clear picture. Elena, devastated by the betrayal, turned to alcohol for solace. Her decision to drive that night, though ultimately her own, was profoundly influenced by the emotional turmoil caused by Nathan and Isabel's deceit. Ultimately, no criminal charges were filed in relation to Elena's death, but in the court of public opinion, Nathan and Isabel were judged severely. The scandal of their affair spread throughout Crestwood, irreparably tarnishing their reputations and ensuring that the memory of Elena's demise would haunt them forever. As time passed, the acute pain of the incident began to fade, but its impact lingered in Crestwood. The town gradually returned to its serene exterior, but its inhabitants carried with them the knowledge that beneath the surface of their seemingly peaceful community, powerful emotions and hidden secrets could swirl with devastating consequences. The tragedy of Elena Morrison had indelibly altered the soul of Crestwood, marking its history and its people permanently. At the center of this storm were three individuals whose lives would become inextricably entangled. Thaddeus Bracey, a 32-year-old personal trainer with a body chiseled from marble, had built a reputation as the go-to fitness guru. Among his newest clients was Julia Ashworth, a 45-year-old socialite known for her impeccable taste. Julia was the very picture of suburban success, intelligent, beautiful, and married to Luke Ashworth, a 50-year-old real estate mogul whose name graced half the commercial buildings in the nearby city. The Ashworths were the golden couple of Oak Ridge Heights. Their sprawling Georgian-style mansion hosted the most coveted parties, and their philanthropic efforts made headlines in the local press. To the outside world, they embodied the American dream, successful, charitable, and deeply in love. But as with many stories that begin in seeming perfection, cracks were forming in the foundation of the Ashworths' world. These fissures would provide the perfect entry point for Thaddeus Bracey, a man whose own past was shrouded in mystery and marked by a determination to rise above his humble beginnings. Little did anyone know that the arrival of Thaddeus in the Ashworths' lives would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to passion, betrayal, and ultimately, a confrontation that would leave the community reeling, and one person dead. Thaddeus Bracey's journey to becoming Oak Ridge Heights' most sought-after personal trainer was far from smooth. Born in a struggling neighborhood of Detroit, Thaddeus grew up in a world where survival often trumped ambition. His father, a factory worker, died when Thaddeus was just 10, leaving his mother to raise him and his two younger sisters on a meager salary. From an early age, Thaddeus found solace and strength in physical fitness. The local community center became his second home, where he spent countless hours lifting weights and running on old treadmills. It was here that he first dreamed of a life beyond the confines of his neighborhood. At 18, Thaddeus enlisted in the Army, seeing it as his ticket out. During his 4-year service, he honed his body and mind, earning accolades for his physical prowess and leadership skills. However, his military career came to an abrupt end when he was honorably discharged following a controversial incident involving a superior officer, the details of which Thaddeus never fully disclosed. Upon returning to civilian life, Thaddeus leveraged his military experience and physical conditioning into a career as a personal trainer. He started small, working at budget gyms and taking on any client he could find. His dedication, combined with his natural charisma, soon earned him a devoted following. 5 years before the events that would change everything, Thaddeus made the calculated decision to move to Oak Ridge Heights. He saw the affluent suburb as fertile ground for his ambitions, a place where his skills could command premium prices. Within 2 years, he had established himself as the trainer to the stars, his past struggles hidden behind a veneer of success and confidence. Luke and Julia Ashworth's marriage was the stuff of local legend. They had met 20 years earlier at a charity auction, where Luke, already a rising star in real estate, had outbid everyone for a date with Julia, then a recent college graduate working in public relations. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding just 6 months later, covered extensively by the local media. For the first decade of their marriage, Luke and Julia seemed to have it all. Luke's business acumen led to the rapid expansion of his real estate empire, while Julia's social skills and philanthropic efforts made them the darlings of Oak Ridge Heights high society. They traveled the world, donated generously to local causes, and hosted events that were the talk of the town. However, as the years wore on, subtle tensions began to emerge. Luke's workaholic tendencies meant he was often absent, leaving Julia to manage their social life and household alone. Their inability to conceive a child, despite years of trying and expensive fertility treatments, added strain to their relationship. To the outside world, the Ashworths maintained a united front. They still attended events arm in arm, smiling for cameras and exchanging loving glances. But behind closed doors, silence and resentment were becoming more common than intimate conversations. Julia threw herself into her charity work and social engagements, while Luke spent increasingly long hours at the office. By the time Thaddeus entered their lives, the Ashworths' marriage was a beautifully crafted facade, hiding a growing emotional distance that neither was fully ready to acknowledge. The fateful first encounter between Thaddeus and Luke occurred at the Oak Ridge Heights Country Club, where Julia had begun taking personal training sessions with Thaddeus. Luke, finishing a round of golf, happened upon them as Thaddeus was demonstrating a stretch to Julia. Luke's eyes were immediately drawn to Thaddeus's physique, a fact he would later struggle to admit to himself. Thaddeus, ever the professional, greeted Luke with his trademark winning smile and a firm handshake that lingered a moment too long. As Julia enthusiastically praised Thaddeus's skills as a trainer, Luke found himself captivated by the younger man's confidence and easy charm. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on fitness, business, and their shared love of vintage cars. Before parting ways, Luke surprised himself by expressing interest in personal training sessions. Thaddeus, sensing an opportunity, suggested a trial session at the Ashworth home gym. As Luke watched Thaddeus walk away, he felt a flutter of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. For his part, Thaddeus knew he had made an impression on the powerful Mr. Ashworth, an impression he was determined to capitalize on, both professionally and personally. The first private training session between Thaddeus and Luke took place on a crisp, autumn morning in the Ashworth state-of-the-art home gym. Julia had left early for a charity board meeting, leaving the two men alone in the sprawling mansion. As Thaddeus guided Luke through a series of exercises, the sexual tension between them was palpable.
Luke found himself hyper-aware of Thaddeus's touch as the trainer adjusted his form. Their eyes met in the mirror, lingering longer than necessary. Thaddeus, sensing Luke's interest, subtly increased the intimacy of his instructions, his hands ghosting over Luke's body under the guise of professional guidance. By the end of the session, both men were breathless, and not just from the physical exertion. As Luke toweled off, Thaddeus made his move. He complimented Luke's physique, noting how responsive his body was to instruction. The innuendo was clear, and Luke, his defenses lowered by endorphins and long-suppressed desire, didn't resist when Thaddeus leaned in for a kiss. What followed was a passionate encounter that left both men exhilarated and conflicted. For Luke, it was a revelation, a chance to explore feelings he had long buried beneath his heterosexual marriage and public persona. For Thaddeus, it was a mixture of genuine attraction and calculated risk, knowing that an affair with Luke could either elevate or destroy his carefully constructed life in Oak Ridge Heights. In the aftermath, as they lay catching their breath on the gym floor, reality began to seep back in. Luke, guilt washing over him, started to stammer out apologies and excuses. Thaddeus, ever the smooth operator, reassured him. This could be their secret, he suggested. No one needed to know. They were both adults, both seeking something their current lives couldn't provide. Why not indulge? Luke, torn between his loyalty to Julia and his newfound passion, ultimately agreed to continue the affair. They set ground rules. Discretion was paramount, and their encounters would be limited to training sessions when Julia was away. Over the next few months, Thaddeus and Luke's affair intensified. What started as purely physical quickly developed emotional undertones. Luke found himself opening up to Thaddeus about his frustrations with work and his marriage in a way he never had with anyone else. Thaddeus, in turn, shared carefully curated stories from his past, painting himself as a sensitive soul beneath his confident exterior. Their rendezvous became more frequent and daring. Quick encounters in the home gym expanded to steamy sessions in high-end hotel rooms and secluded spots around Oak Ridge Heights. Each time, they promised it would be the last, but neither could resist the pull of their forbidden romance. As their emotional connection deepened, so did the risks they were willing to take. Close calls became more frequent, a lingering touch at a charity event, a heated glance across a crowded restaurant. The thrill of nearly being caught only added to the intensity of their affair. Little did they know their web of secrecy was about to unravel, setting in motion a series of events that would shake the foundations of Oak Ridge Heights and lead to consequences neither man could have foreseen. As Thaddeus and Luke's affair intensified, so did the complexity of their deceptions. Luke, once a man of routine, began crafting elaborate excuses for his absences and changes in schedule. Late nights at the office became more frequent, with Luke claiming he was working on a major development deal that required his constant attention. Weekend golf games stretched into all-day affairs, supposedly due to networking opportunities with potential clients. Thaddeus, for his part, juggled his growing client list with precision, always ensuring he had a plausible reason to be near Luke. He cultivated friendships with other Oak Ridge Heights residents, using their sessions as cover for his frequent presence in the neighborhood. He even went so far as to start a fitness class at the country club, providing a legitimate reason for his car to be parked there at odd hours. Their lives began to intertwine, creating a fragile house of cards. They coordinated their stories, memorizing details of fabricated events and imaginary people to maintain consistency. Luke spoke of a new junior partner named Xavier, who conveniently required extensive mentoring during evening hours. Thaddeus invented a high-maintenance client called Eloise, whose demands for last-minute sessions explained his sudden schedule changes. The stress of maintaining these falsehoods took its toll. Luke, once known for his sharp memory, found himself struggling to keep track of his own lies. He began keeping a coded journal, hidden in his office safe, to maintain the consistency of his stories. Thaddeus, ever meticulous, created a complex calendar system on his phone, with layers of fake appointments hiding the truth of his whereabouts. As months passed, their web of deceit grew ever more tangled. Each lie required another to support it, and soon both men found themselves living in a parallel reality of their own creation. The thrill of their secret rendezvous was increasingly tainted by the constant fear of discovery, yet neither could bring themselves to end the affair. While Thaddeus and Luke were entangled in their affair, Julia Ashworth was far from oblivious. At first, the changes in her husband were subtle. A new cologne, a sudden interest in fitness, longer hours at the office. She initially attributed these changes to a midlife renaissance, even feeling a spark of hope that it might rejuvenate their stagnant marriage. However, as weeks turned to months, Julia's instincts began to sound alarms. Luke's emotional distance, once a dull ache in their relationship, now felt like a chasm. His excuses for missed dinners and social engagements grew more elaborate and less convincing. She noticed him guarding his phone, angling the screen away when she entered a room. Julia's suspicions began to affect her daily life. She found herself analyzing every conversation, searching for inconsistencies in Luke's stories. Her normally impeccable focus during charity meetings wavered as her mind raced with possibilities. Was Luke having an affair? Was it with a colleague or perhaps a younger woman? The irony that Thaddeus, her own personal trainer, was at the center of her marital turmoil eluded her completely. In fact, Julia often confided in Thaddeus during their sessions, unaware that she was sharing her fears with the very man causing them. Thaddeus, in a display of psychological acrobatics, offered her comfort and advice, all while continuing his affair with her husband. As her suspicions grew, Julia began to withdraw from her social circles, fearful that she was the subject of local gossip. Her charity work, once a source of joy and purpose, became a performance where she struggled to maintain her composure. At home, the silence between her and Luke grew heavier, filled with unasked questions and unspoken accusations. Determined to uncover the truth, Julia decided to take matters into her own hands, setting in motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to a confrontation with devastating consequences. The fragile equilibrium of Thaddeus and Luke's secret affair was shattered. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, when Thaddeus received an anonymous text message. The contents were chilling. A clear photograph of him and Luke in an intimate embrace, taken through the window of their favorite hotel room. The message that followed was succinct. $50K or this goes public. You have 48 hours. Panic set in immediately. Thaddeus's carefully constructed world in Oak Ridge Heights teetered on the brink of collapse. His reputation, his business, everything he had worked for was at risk. But more than that, the threat extended to Luke. Exposure would mean the end of his marriage, potential professional ruin, and public humiliation. Thaddeus immediately contacted Luke, arranging an urgent meeting under the guise of an emergency training session. In the secluded corner of a 24-hour gym, Thaddeus showed Luke the threatening message. Luke's face drained of color as he realized the precariousness of their situation. The next 48 hours were a frenzy of activity, as they scrambled to gather the funds without raising suspicion. Luke, despite his wealth, found himself in a liquidity crunch due to ongoing real estate developments. He was forced to take out a high-interest loan, claiming it was for a time-sensitive business opportunity. Thaddeus liquidated his savings and maxed out his credit cards, telling his bank he was planning to open a new gym. As the deadline approached, the strain began to show. Luke became irritable and distracted, snapping at colleagues and avoiding Julia even more than usual. Thaddeus's typically flawless training sessions were marred by distraction and anxiety, leading to complaints from some of his high-profile clients. With just hours to spare, they managed to cobble together the required amount. Following the blackmailer's instructions, Thaddeus made the drop at a designated location, a nondescript locker at the Oak Ridge Heights bus terminal. As he walked away, having secured a promise that all evidence would be destroyed, Thaddeus felt a mix of relief and deepening dread. Who was behind this? Could they trust that it was truly over? The blackmail incident left both men shaken. What had once been an exhilarating secret was now a source of constant fear. Every unexpected phone call, every lingering glance from a stranger on the street became a potential threat. The passion that had fueled their affair was now tempered by paranoia. Moreover, the financial strain of the blackmail payment introduced new tensions. Luke, forced to explain the sudden loan to his business partners, found himself entangled in more lies. Thaddeus, his savings depleted, began to take on more clients and longer hours, leaving less time for their clandestine meetings. As they grappled with these new realities, neither man realized that their actions had not gone unnoticed. The withdrawn funds, the secretive meetings, the sudden changes in behavior, all of these had caught the attention of someone much closer to home. Julia Ashworth, her suspicions now a raging fire, had decided it was time to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Driven by a mixture of suspicion, hurt, and determination, Julia Ashworth embarked on a mission to uncover the truth behind her husband's increasingly erratic behavior. Her first step was to hire Rhonda Vesper, a discreet but highly effective private investigator recommended by a fellow socialite who had gone through a messy divorce. Rhonda began her investigation with meticulous precision. She set up surveillance on Luke, tracking his movements and photographing his encounters. Initially, the evidence seemed innocuous. Long hours at the office, business meetings at upscale restaurants, and frequent visits to the gym. However, as days turned into weeks, patterns began to emerge that didn't quite add up. Luke's supposed late-night meetings often coincided with times when Thaddeus's car was spotted in the vicinity. The gym visits extended far beyond reasonable workout times, with Luke and Thaddeus frequently leaving within minutes of each other. Rhonda's photographs captured lingering glances and seemingly casual touches that hinted at a deeper connection. As Rhonda dug deeper, she uncovered financial discrepancies that raised further red flags. The large unexplained loan Luke had taken out, coupled with numerous cash withdrawals from both men's accounts, pointed to some sort of shared secret or mutual blackmail. Julia, upon receiving Rhonda's detailed reports, felt her world crumbling around her. The possibility that Luke was having an affair was painful enough, but the realization that it might be with Thaddeus, a man she had trusted and confided in, was almost unbearable. Determined to gather irrefutable evidence, Julia took matters into her own hands. She installed a hidden camera in Luke's home office and placed a discreet tracking device on his car. She began to pay closer attention to Thaddeus during their training sessions, noting how he skillfully deflected questions about Luke's fitness progress. The final piece of evidence came on a Tuesday afternoon, when Julia, acting on a hunch, decided to surprise Luke at his office. As she approached his private conference room, she heard muffled voices. Peering through a crack in the door, she saw Luke and Thaddeus in an intimate embrace, their conversation a mix of endearments and worried whispers about someone who was watching them. In that moment, as her suspicions were confirmed in the most painful way possible, Julia felt a surge of emotions, betrayal, anger, and a steely resolve. She quietly retreated, her mind racing with plans for confrontation and retribution. The stage was set for a showdown that would change all of their lives forever. The day of reckoning arrived on a stormy Friday evening. Julia, armed with a folder full of evidence and a heart full of rage, waited for Luke in their expansive living room. She had sent the household staff away for the weekend, ensuring complete privacy for what she knew would be an explosive confrontation. When Luke walked through the door, shaking rain from his coat, he was met with an icy stare from his wife. Julia, her voice eerily calm, asked him to sit down. Confused and slightly alarmed by her demeanor, Luke complied, his mind racing to recall if he had forgotten an important date or event. Julia began by sliding the folder across the coffee table. As Luke opened it, his face drained of color. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and a detailed timeline of his affair with Thaddeus. Julia watched, her composure cracking, as Luke's expression cycled through shock, shame, and finally desperate denial. "Luke, you've been lying to me for months," Julia said, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion. Luke, realizing the futility of further deception, attempted to explain. He spoke of feeling trapped, of rediscovering himself, of the unexpected connection he had found with Thaddeus. His words, meant to clarify, only stoked the fires of Julia's anger. The argument escalated quickly. Years of unspoken resentments and frustrations poured out. Julia hurled accusations of betrayal and selfishness, while Luke countered with complaints of emotional distance and feeling unfulfilled. The elegant living room, usually a showcase of their perfect life, now echoed with harsh words and bitter recriminations. As the confrontation reached a fever pitch, the doorbell rang. Julia, her face flushed with anger, strode to answer it, expecting to find a concerned neighbor drawn by the shouting. Instead, she found Thaddeus on the doorstep, soaked from the rain and wearing an expression of confusion and alarm. Seizing his arm, Julia dragged Thaddeus into the house, forcing a three-way confrontation. Thaddeus, caught off guard, looked to Luke for guidance but found only panic in his lover's eyes. The atmosphere in the room shifted from anger to something more dangerous, a volatile mix of fear, jealousy, and desperation. Julia demanded answers from Thaddeus, her words laced with venom. She accused him of manipulating his way into their lives, of using his position as her trainer to seduce her husband. Thaddeus, his usual confidence shattered, attempted to defend himself, but his words seemed hollow in the face of Julia's fury. Luke, seeing Thaddeus under attack, felt a surge of protectiveness. He moved to stand between his wife and his lover, a gesture that only inflamed Julia's rage. In a moment of blind anger, she grabbed a heavy crystal vase from a nearby table and swung it at Luke. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but would have repercussions that would last a lifetime. Luke, instinctively ducking, caused the vase to miss him and strike Thaddeus squarely on the temple. The impact was sickeningly loud in the sudden silence that followed. Thaddeus staggered, his eyes unfocused, before collapsing to the floor. Blood began to pool around his head, staining the expensive Persian rug a deep crimson. Julia and Luke stood frozen, the gravity of what had just occurred slowly sinking in. In that moment, as the storm raged outside and Thaddeus lay motionless on their living room floor, the lives of all three were irrevocably altered. The perfect facade of Oak Ridge Heights' golden couple had not just cracked, it had shattered completely, with consequences none of them could have foreseen. The moments following Thaddeus's collapse were a blur of panic and frantic activity. Luke, his legal training kicking in despite the shock, immediately called 911. Julia, her anger evaporating into horror, attempted to stem the bleeding with a nearby throw pillow, her trembling hands quickly becoming stained with Thaddeus's blood. Paramedics arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the quiet suburban night. They worked efficiently, assessing Thaddeus's condition with grim expressions. Despite their best efforts, it was clear that the situation was dire. The blow to Thaddeus's temple had caused severe trauma, and he remained unresponsive as they prepared him for transport. As the ambulance sped away, its lights flashing in the rain-slicked streets, Luke and Julia were left to face the aftermath of their actions. The living room, once a showcase of their perfect life, now resembled a crime scene. Blood stained the expensive rug. The overturned furniture bore witness to their violent confrontation, and shards of the crystal vase glittered ominously in the dim light. At the hospital, a team of doctors fought to save Thaddeus's life. Hours passed in a haze of tense waiting and hushed conversations. Luke and Julia sat in separate corners of the waiting room, the weight of their shared secret and mutual recriminations keeping them apart, even in this moment of crisis. As dawn broke, a somber-faced doctor approached them. Despite all efforts, Thaddeus had succumbed to his injuries. The blunt force trauma to his head had caused irreparable brain damage, and he had slipped away in the early hours of the morning. The news hit Luke and Julia like a physical blow. In the span of a few hours, their lives had been upended in ways they could never have imagined. Their perfect world had not only been revealed as a facade, but had crumbled entirely, leaving a man dead in its wake. As they sat in stunned silence, the reality of their situation began to sink in. This was no longer just about an affair or a betrayed marriage. They were now at the center of a potential homicide investigation. The sound of approaching footsteps broke their reverie. Two police officers, their faces serious, were walking towards them. In that moment, as the first rays of sunlight streamed through the hospital windows, Luke and Julia Ashworth knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The golden couple of Oak Ridge Heights was about to face a reckoning that would shake their community to its core. The death of Thaddeus Bracey quickly became the focus of an intense police investigation. Detective Imogen Sloan, a veteran of the Oak Ridge Heights Police Department, was assigned to lead the case. Known for her sharp intellect and unwavering dedication, Detective Sloan approached the investigation with meticulous care. The Ashworth residence was cordoned off as a crime scene, with forensic teams combing through every inch of the property. The crystal vase, now a crucial piece of evidence, was carefully bagged and sent for analysis. Blood spatter patterns were studied, and every surface was dusted for fingerprints. Luke and Julia were subjected to hours of grueling interrogations. Their statements, initially given separately, were cross-referenced and scrutinized for inconsistencies. The couple's attempt to present a united front quickly crumbled under Detective Sloan's skilled questioning. As the investigation deepened, more details emerged. The financial transactions related to the blackmail came to light, adding another layer of complexity to the case. Thaddeus's past, including his military service and the mysterious incident that led to his discharge, became subjects of intense scrutiny. Detective Sloan also focused on the wider circle of Oak Ridge Heights society. Interviews with the Ashworths' friends, neighbors, and business associates painted a picture of a couple whose perfect image had been carefully cultivated but was far from reality. As weeks passed, The investigation began to point towards a charge of involuntary manslaughter. The evidence suggested that while Thaddeus's death was not premeditated, it was the direct result of Julia's actions during a heated confrontation. The stage was set for a trial that would captivate the nation and tear apart the fabric of Oak Ridge Heights high society. Julia's defense team, headed by the high-profile attorney Jameson Drake, argued that the death was a tragic accident, the result of a highly emotional confrontation rather than any intent to harm. They emphasized Julia's philanthropic work and standing in the community, portraying her as a victim of her husband's infidelity who had acted out of character in a moment of extreme distress. The trial lasted 4 weeks, captivating the nation with its mix of sex, betrayal, and suburban scandal. Luke's testimony proved particularly damaging as he struggled to reconcile his loyalty to Julia with the truth of his affair with Thaddeus. In the end, the jury found Julia guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The judge, taking into account her lack of prior criminal history and the circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, a decision that sparked debate about privilege and justice in America. Luke, while not criminally charged, faced civil lawsuits from Thaddeus's family and the collapse of his business empire as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. As Julia was led away to begin her sentence, the once golden couple of Oak Ridge Heights had been reduced to cautionary tales, their fall from grace complete and irreversible. Amanda Everwood, with her chestnut hair and piercing blue eyes, was the epitome of elegance and creativity. Born into a family of artists, her childhood home was filled with the scent of oil paints and the sight of canvases in various stages of completion. Amanda had inherited her mother's talent and her father's determination, quickly making a name for herself as an exceptional landscape artist. Her works were known for their vibrant colors and the way they captured the soul of nature. Richard Everwood, in contrast, came from a lineage of lawyers. The Everwood family was renowned for their legal prowess, with generations serving as judges, attorneys, and legal scholars. Richard was no different. He excelled in law school, graduating top of his class, and quickly climbed the ranks at one of the most prestigious law firms in Belleville. His charm, good looks, and sharp mind made him a formidable attorney and a desirable husband. Amanda and Richard met during their sophomore year of college. It was a classic case of opposites. Attracting Amanda's free-spirited nature complemented Richard's structured and disciplined approach to life. They fell in love quickly, their relationship blossoming amidst late-night study sessions, gallery openings, and summer road trips. After graduating, they married in a lavish ceremony that was the talk of Belleville. They settled into a beautiful Victorian home that Amanda adored. She transformed it into a haven filled with art, music, and love. The house had a large garden where Amanda often painted, drawing inspiration from the vibrant flowers and the changing seasons. Richard, on the other hand, was dedicated to his work, often spending long hours at the office. They had a son, Ethan, who became the center of Amanda's world. Their life seemed perfect, at least on the surface. Amanda's days were filled with painting, volunteering at the local art center, and taking care of Ethan. Richard's career continued to flourish, and he was soon made partner at his firm. They attended glamorous parties and charity events, where they were often the center of attention. However, as the years went by, Amanda noticed subtle changes in Richard. He became more distant, often coming home late and leaving early in the morning. The once warm and affectionate man she married was now cold and preoccupied. Amanda tried to ignore these changes, attributing them to the stress of his demanding job. However, the gnawing suspicion in the back of her mind grew stronger with each passing day. Carla Monroe entered their lives when Richard hired her as his personal secretary. Carla was stunning, with her dark, cascading hair, sharp features, and an aura of confidence that turned heads wherever she went. She was efficient, intelligent, and seemed to understand Richard in a way that Amanda no longer could. It wasn't long before Amanda's suspicions turned towards Carla. One evening, Amanda decided to confront Richard. She prepared a candlelit dinner, hoping to reignite the spark in their relationship and to get him to open up. As they sat across from each other at the dining table, Amanda poured her heart out, expressing her concerns and fears. Richard listened, but dismissed her worries, attributing his behavior to the pressures of his job. He assured her that there was nothing to worry about, but Amanda wasn't convinced. Determined to uncover the truth, Amanda hired a private investigator named Mark Collins. Mark was a seasoned professional with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. Over the next few weeks, he followed Richard and Carla, documenting their interactions. The evidence he gathered was damning. Late-night dinners, weekends away, and intimate encounters that left no room for doubt. Richard was having an affair with Carla. Amanda felt a mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a deep sadness. She couldn't understand how Richard could do this to their family. But amidst her turmoil, she also felt a strange sense of relief. At least now she knew the truth, and she could decide what to do next. Armed with the evidence, Amanda's initial devastation gave way to a steely resolve. She decided to confront Carla first, hoping to gather more information before dealing with Richard. Amanda arranged a meeting under the pretense of discussing a charity event that Richard's firm was sponsoring. Carla, unaware of Amanda's true intentions, agreed to meet at a chic downtown cafe. The cafe was a cozy, intimate space with soft lighting and plush seating. Amanda arrived early, choosing a secluded corner table where they could talk privately. Carla walked in a few minutes later, exuding confidence and poise. As she approached the table, Amanda felt a mixture of anger and curiosity. Carla greeted Amanda warmly and commented on how beautiful the cafe was. Amanda, hiding her true feelings, replied politely and steered the conversation towards Richard. She mentioned how Richard had been spending a lot of time at the office and asked how he was handling the workload. Carla responded that Richard was incredibly dedicated and that the cases he was working on required a lot of his time and attention. Amanda then leaned in and, in a low voice, told Carla that she knew about the affair. Carla's face paled, and she opened her mouth to speak, but Amanda stopped her, saying she wasn't there to accuse or blame her. Amanda just wanted to understand why it happened. Carla, with tears in her eyes, explained that it started a few years ago when Richard was going through a rough patch at work. They began spending more time together, and one thing led to another. As Carla spoke, Amanda felt a strange sense of empathy. She could see the pain in Carla's eyes, a reflection of her own turmoil. By the end of the conversation, they had formed an unexpected connection. Amanda was captivated by Carla's intelligence and charisma, while Carla found solace in Amanda's understanding and compassion. In the weeks that followed, Amanda and Carla continued to meet in secret. What had started as a confrontation evolved into a complex relationship. Their meetings became more frequent, and their bond deepened. One evening, Carla invited Amanda to her apartment, ostensibly to review some documents related to the charity event. The apartment was a stylish modern space, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of the city. As they sat on the couch, sipping wine and talking, the tension between them grew palpable. Carla set her glass down and looked into Amanda's eyes, saying that she had developed feelings for her. Amanda's heart raced. She had felt the same way, but had been too afraid to admit it. She confessed that she felt the same way. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, and that night, they crossed the line from emotional connection to physical intimacy. The affair was intense, a whirlwind of stolen moments and secret rendezvous. Amanda felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, but she was also plagued by guilt and fear. They would meet in secluded spots around the city, hidden corners of parks, out-of-the-way cafes, and Carla's apartment, where they felt free from the prying eyes of the world. Their conversations ranged from deep, philosophical discussions to light-hearted banter. They shared their hopes, dreams, and fears, forming a bond that went beyond physical attraction. However, Amanda was acutely aware of the precariousness of their situation. She knew that if Richard found out, the consequences would be dire. Despite this, she couldn't bring herself to end the affair. Carla had become an essential part of her life, filling a void that she hadn't realized existed. Richard's suspicions grew as he noticed Amanda's changed behavior. She was more distant, often lost in thought, and seemed to have a newfound sense of confidence. Richard's paranoia led him to install a hidden camera in Carla's apartment, suspecting that Amanda might have discovered his affair and was plotting against him. When Richard reviewed the footage and saw his wife with Carla, his rage and sense of betrayal reached a boiling point. He felt emasculated and humiliated, convinced that both women had conspired against him. Richard began to meticulously plan his revenge. Determined to regain control over his life, one stormy night, Richard invited Amanda to his office under the pretense of wanting to discuss their relationship and find a way forward. Amanda, hopeful for reconciliation, agreed. As she entered Richard's dimly lit office, she was struck by the coldness in his eyes. Richard told Amanda to sit down, his voice devoid of emotion. Amanda took a seat, her heart pounding. She started to speak, but Richard cut her off, slamming a folder of photographs on the desk. He said he knew everything and knew about her and Carla. Amanda's eyes widened in shock as she looked at the incriminating photos. She pleaded with Richard to let her explain, but he was beyond reason. He lunged at Amanda, his hands closing around her throat. Amanda struggled, clawing at his hands, but Richard's grip was unrelenting. Her vision darkened, and within moments she was gone. Richard stood over Amanda's lifeless body, his mind a whirlwind of rage and confusion. He knew he had to act quickly to cover his tracks. He staged the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong, ransacking the office and scattering papers everywhere. He then drove to Carla's apartment, his anger boiling over. Carla was startled to see Richard at her door. She asked what he was doing there, her voice trembling. Richard pushed past her, his eyes wild with fury. He accused her of ruining everything and seducing his wife, destroying his family. Carla backed away, fear gripping her heart, and begged Richard to listen to her and understand that it wasn't like that. But Richard was beyond listening. He lunged at Carla, but she managed to evade him, grabbing a heavy vase and smashing it over his head. Richard staggered, momentarily disoriented. Carla seized the opportunity and fled. Running into the night with nothing but the clothes on her back, she ran through the rain-soaked streets, her mind racing with fear and confusion. She had to get as far away from Richard as possible. She knew that if he caught her, he would kill her. Carla reached the outskirts of town and found an old abandoned cabin. She slipped inside, her body trembling with adrenaline and terror. The next morning, Ethan Everwood found himself without a mother and soon without a father. Richard, attempting to cover his tracks, reported Amanda missing and fabricated an alibi for himself. However, the police quickly uncovered inconsistencies in his story. Amanda's body was discovered in Richard's office, and forensic evidence, along with Richard's erratic behavior, pointed to his guilt. He was arrested and later convicted of Amanda's murder, sentenced to life in prison without parole. Carla, meanwhile, had vanished without a trace. Her car was found abandoned at a rest stop, miles away from Belleville. There were rumors that she had fled the country, but no concrete evidence ever emerged. Some speculated she had started a new life under an assumed identity. Carla's disappearance puzzled many. Growing up in a household marked by religious fervor and violence, Carla had endured years of suppression and fear. Fleeing wasn't just an escape, it was a lifeline to freedom. She feared the repercussions of being discovered by her family, knowing all too well the horrors they could unleash upon her, driving her to vanish without a trace, leaving behind a life of oppression for one of uncertain liberty. Ethan, now orphaned, was taken in by Amanda's sister Lydia, who raised him with love and care. The Everwood home, once filled with laughter and love, stood silent, a stark reminder of the tragic events that had unfolded. Lydia did her best to create a stable environment for Ethan, but the shadow of his parents' tragedy loomed large over his childhood. She often wondered what kind of man Ethan would grow up to be, carrying the weight of such a dark legacy. Carla's escape was not without difficulty. She knew she had to leave Belleville and disappear completely. She had some cash saved up and used it to buy a bus ticket to the nearest big city. From there, she moved from place to place, using different names and taking on various odd jobs to survive. Her once confident and poised demeanor was replaced by constant anxiety and fear of being recognized. Carla found temporary solace in small towns, where she could blend into the background. She dyed her hair, changed her appearance, and avoided making close connections with anyone. Each time she felt someone might recognize her, she moved on. Her life became a series of temporary stays and fleeting moments of peace. She missed Amanda deeply, and often dreamed about their time together, the passion they shared and the plans they had made. In a small coastal town far from Belleville, Carla finally found a semblance of stability. She took on a job at a local diner, working long hours and keeping to herself. The town was quiet, and the people were friendly but respectful of her privacy. For the first time in months, Carla began to relax and let her guard down a little. She rented a small, modest apartment and tried to rebuild her life, though the fear of being discovered never entirely left her. Ethan, now a teenager, struggled with the burden of his family's dark history. He was a quiet, introspective boy, often lost in thought. Lydia did her best to provide a loving home, but Ethan couldn't escape the whispers and stares from those who knew about his parents. School was a challenge, with classmates either avoiding him or bullying him for his father's crime. Ethan found solace in books and spent hours at the local library, immersing himself in stories far removed from his reality. Lydia encouraged Ethan to pursue his interests, hoping to provide him with a positive outlet. He developed a passion for writing, pouring his emotions and experiences into his stories. His teachers noticed his talent and encouraged him to pursue a career in literature. Despite the darkness of his past, Ethan found hope in the future he could create for himself. One day, while browsing through old family photo albums, Ethan came across a photograph of his parents during happier times. They looked so in love, so full of life. He wondered how everything had gone so wrong. Determined to understand, Ethan began to dig deeper into his family's history. He read old newspaper articles, interviewed people who had known his parents, and pieced together the story of their lives. Ethan's investigation led him to discover the affair between his father and Carla. He was shocked and saddened by the betrayal, but he also felt a strange connection to Carla. He wondered what had happened to her after that fateful night. His search for answers led him to contact Mark Collins, the private investigator Amanda had hired. Mark, now retired, was hesitant to reopen old wounds but was moved by Ethan's determination. Mark shared with Ethan the details of his investigation, the evidence he had gathered, and the events that had transpired. Ethan learned about the confrontation between his mother and Carla, their subsequent affair, and the night his mother was murdered. Ethan felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a deep need for closure. Determined to find Carla, Ethan followed the trail she had left behind. He visited the places she had stayed, talked to people who had encountered her, and slowly pieced together her journey. The trail eventually led him to the small coastal town where Carla was now living. Carla was working her usual shift at the diner when Ethan walked in. She didn't recognize him at first, but as he approached her, she saw a familiar sadness in his eyes. Ethan introduced himself, explaining that he was Amanda and Richard's son. Carla was stunned and filled with a mixture of fear and hope. She invited Ethan to sit down, and they began to talk. Ethan told Carla about his life, his struggles, and his search for answers. Carla, in turn, shared her story, her escape, and her attempts to rebuild her life. They talked for hours, sharing their pain and their memories of Amanda. Carla revealed how deeply she had loved Amanda, and how the affair had been a source of both joy and torment. Ethan asked Carla about the night his mother was murdered. Carla recounted the events, her voice trembling with emotion. She told him how Richard had confronted her, his rage and violence, and her desperate escape. Ethan listened intently, feeling a mix of anger towards his father and compassion for Carla. Ethan decided to stay in the coastal town for a while, to get to know Carla better, and to find some closure for himself. They spent a lot of time together, talking about Amanda, sharing stories, and helping each other heal. Carla found comfort in Ethan's presence, and Ethan felt a sense of connection and understanding that he had never felt before. As time went on, Ethan and Carla's relationship grew stronger. They became a support system for each other, helping to heal the wounds of the past. Ethan continued to write, inspired by the stories Carla had shared and the strength he saw in her. Carla found a new sense of purpose, helping Ethan and finding a way to move forward with her life. Years passed, and Ethan published his first novel, a fictionalized account of his family's story. The book received critical acclaim, and Ethan was praised for his emotional depth and storytelling ability. He dedicated the book to his mother, Amanda, and to Carla, who had shown him the importance of understanding and forgiveness. Carla, meanwhile, continued to live in the coastal town, finding peace and stability. She stayed in touch with Ethan, visiting him often and watching him grow into a successful writer. She found solace in the fact that she had been able to help Ethan find closure and that they had both found a way to move forward. The Everwood murders became a notorious case in Belleville, a cautionary tale of deceit, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of hidden passions. Amanda's art gained a lot of fame, her landscapes now imbued with a haunting beauty that drew admirers from afar. Richard's name, once respected, became synonymous with tragedy and madness. Years later, the town still whispered about Carla Monroe, the enigmatic secretary who disappeared into the night. Her fate remained one of Belleville's greatest mysteries, a lingering shadow over the tragic tale of the Everwood family. Ethan grew up carrying the weight of his parents' legacy, determined to forge a different path and break free from the cycle of betrayal and violence. In the end, the story of the Everwood murders served as a stark reminder of the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of secrets and lies. It was a tale that would be told for generations, a dark chapter in the history of Belleville that would never be forgotten. Ethan continued to write, his works often exploring themes of love, betrayal, and redemption. His novels resonated with readers, many of whom were unaware of the true story behind his words. Despite the darkness of his past, Ethan found a way to turn his pain into art, creating something beautiful from the ashes of his family's tragedy. In the end, the Everwood murders were more than just a crime. They were a story of love, loss, and the enduring power of forgiveness. The lives of those involved were forever changed, but they found a way to move forward, to find peace, and create something new from the ruins of their past. Emily Parker was born and raised in the quiet town of Maplewood, Ohio. Her parents, Richard and Ann Parker, were well-respected members of the community. Richard owned a local hardware store, while Ann was a nurse at the nearby hospital. Emily, the middle child with an older brother, Jack, and a younger sister, Sarah, was the apple of her parents' eyes. From an early age, Emily exhibited a zest for life. She was an exceptional student, excelling in her studies and participating in various extracurricular activities. Her passion for teaching emerged during her high school years, inspired by a history teacher who brought the past to life in vivid detail. Emily pursued her dream by attending Ohio State University, where she earned her degree in education. After college, Emily returned to Maplewood and secured a teaching position at the local elementary school. Her dedication to her students was unparalleled. She often stayed late to help with after-school programs and tutored struggling students on weekends. Her colleagues admired her enthusiasm, and parents often requested her for their children's classes. Outside of her professional life, Emily had a wide range of interests. She loved hiking, photography, and reading historical novels. Her weekends were often spent exploring nature trails or curled up with a good book. Friends described her as warm, compassionate, and always ready to lend a helping hand. Emily met David Reynolds at a friend's wedding. He was charming, with a quick wit and an easy smile. David, a financial consultant from New York City, was visiting for the wedding. The attraction was immediate, and their whirlwind romance took everyone by surprise. David lavished Emily with attention, expensive gifts, and exotic trips. Their courtship was brief but intense, and within a year David proposed. Emily, swept off her feet by his charisma and the promise of a glamorous life, said yes. Her family and friends had mixed feelings about the rapid engagement. While they wanted to support Emily's happiness, they couldn't shake a sense of unease about David. He was always impeccably dressed, driving luxury cars and staying in upscale hotels, but his extravagant lifestyle seemed at odds with his modest background. Emily, however, was enamored and reassured everyone that David was her soulmate. Their wedding was a grand affair, held in a picturesque vineyard and attended by over 200 guests. Emily's friends from Maplewood and David's associates from New York mingled under fairy lights and sipped champagne, celebrating the union. As the newlyweds departed for their honeymoon in St. Lucia, no one could have predicted the dark turn their love story would take. David Reynolds was born and raised in Queens, New York. His parents, Thomas and Margaret Reynolds, struggled to make ends meet. Thomas worked as a mechanic, while Margaret held various part-time jobs to support their 3 children. David, the eldest, grew up with a strong drive to escape the financial hardships of his upbringing. From a young age, David exhibited a knack for numbers and a shrewd understanding of money. He excelled in school, earning a scholarship to New York University where he studied finance. David's ambition was evident. He spent his college years networking and securing internships at prestigious firms. His relentless work ethic paid off, and upon graduation, he landed a coveted position at a top financial consultancy. David quickly rose through the ranks, his talent for investment strategies and financial planning earning him a reputation as a rising star. His success afforded him a lifestyle he had always dreamed of: designer suits, high-end cars, and a luxury apartment in Manhattan. However, his professional success masked deeper issues. Colleagues often described David as charming but ruthless, willing to bend the rules to achieve his goals. David's personal life was equally complex. His charm attracted many women, but his relationships were often short-lived. He had a series of high-profile romances, each ending abruptly amid rumors of infidelity and deceit. Despite this, he maintained a polished public image, carefully curating his social media to portray a life of sophistication and success. When David met Emily Parker, she represented something different. Her genuine warmth and small-town innocence were a stark contrast to the superficial relationships he was accustomed to. To his friends, it seemed like David was truly in love for the first time. But as their relationship progressed, cracks began to appear. David's financial empire was not as solid as it seemed. Behind the scenes, he was entangled in risky investments and mounting debts. David's financial troubles were compounded by his extravagant spending habits. He kept these issues hidden from Emily, presenting only the image of a successful and devoted partner. His decision to propose was as much about securing a future with Emily as it was about seeking stability amid his growing financial chaos. Their wedding, though a joyous occasion, also marked the point where David's deceptions began to catch up with him. St. Lucia, with its lush landscapes and serene beaches, was the perfect backdrop for David and Emily's honeymoon. They stayed at an exclusive resort, their bungalow perched on the edge of a secluded cove. The first few days were filled with romantic dinners, sunset walks, and excursions to explore the island's natural beauty. Emily documented their adventures on social media, her posts filled with joy and excitement. On the night of Emily's disappearance, the couple dined at the resort's beachfront restaurant. The atmosphere was idyllic. Soft music played in the background, and tiki torches flickered in the gentle breeze. Fellow diners noticed the couple laughing and holding hands, seemingly in love. The staff, accustomed to honeymooners, paid them little special attention. After dinner, David suggested a moonlit walk along the beach. Emily, always one for romance, readily agreed. They strolled along the water's edge, the sound of the waves mingling with their conversation. David later recounted that Emily had expressed a desire to take a swim. She slipped off her sandals and waded into the water, the moonlight casting a silver glow on her figure. According to David, he returned to their bungalow to fetch a jacket for Emily. When he came back, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched the beach, calling her name. He alerted the resort staff, who joined the search, but Emily was nowhere to be found. David's distress seemed genuine as he spoke with the resort's manager, his voice cracking and hands trembling. The following morning, the local police were notified. They began an immediate investigation, questioning resort staff and guests. Divers searched the waters near the beach, and sniffer dogs were brought in to track any scent that might lead to Emily. Despite their efforts, no clues emerged. The beach was combed for any personal items, but nothing was found. As the hours turned into days, David's behavior began to attract scrutiny. He appeared genuinely distraught, but there were moments when his composure seemed forced. The police noted his meticulous recounting of events, almost as if rehearsed. Resort staff mentioned his insistence on calling his lawyer soon after Emily's disappearance, which struck them as odd. Witnesses provided conflicting accounts. Some recalled seeing the couple arguing earlier in the day, while others described them as affectionate. A few guests reported hearing raised voices from their bungalow the night before Emily vanished. The police were left with a puzzling mix of evidence and testimonies that painted an inconsistent picture of the couple's final hours together. As the investigation stalled, David's narrative was the only story available. His plea for information was broadcast on news networks, his tearful face becoming the public image of a grieving husband. Yet behind the scenes, Detective Hayes was piecing together a different story, one that hinted at a more sinister truth. Detective Hayes arrived at the resort, greeted by the tropical heat and the sight of tourists enjoying their vacations, seemingly unaware of the drama unfolding. His first step was to interview David Reynolds. Sitting across from him in the resort's lounge, Hayes observed David's demeanor carefully. The man seemed genuinely distraught, but there was an underlying tension that the seasoned detective couldn't ignore. David recounted the events of the night Emily disappeared, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of anxiety. Hayes listened intently, asking pointed questions about their activities, their relationship, and any possible reasons Emily might have had to leave suddenly. David's answers were consistent, but Hayes felt they were too polished, as if rehearsed. The detective then spoke with the resort staff and other guests. The accounts varied, some aligning with David's story while others contradicted it. A waitress at the restaurant mentioned that David seemed agitated during dinner, frequently checking his phone. A couple staying in a neighboring bungalow reported hearing an argument late at night, although they couldn't make out the words. Hayes' team searched the couple's bungalow and the surrounding area. They found Emily's belongings neatly packed, her passport and wallet untouched. Her phone was missing, presumably with her. A thorough examination of the beach yielded no new clues. The tide and weather had likely washed away any trace evidence. As the days passed, the investigation broadened. Hayes looked into David's background, finding a man who was both successful and secretive. His financial records revealed a troubling pattern. Despite his high-paying job, David was deep in debt. Large withdrawals from his accounts suggested a gambling problem, and several investments had failed spectacularly. Hayes interviewed David's colleagues and friends in New York, uncovering a different side of him. They described David as charming but unreliable, with a penchant for risky ventures and a history of romantic entanglements. One colleague, who requested anonymity, mentioned that David had recently been involved in a scandal at work, hinting at financial misconduct. The detectives' team also analyzed phone records and bank statements, uncovering a web of transactions that pointed to financial distress. Several large transfers had been made to offshore accounts, and David had taken out substantial loans shortly before the wedding. These findings suggested that David was far from the affluent figure he portrayed. As suspicion around David grew, the investigation took a dramatic turn with the discovery of a letter in Emily's handwriting, found hidden in her suitcase. It was addressed to her parents and hinted at her growing unease about David. She wrote about discovering discrepancies in his stories and financial dealings, expressing fear that she had made a terrible mistake in marrying him. The evidence was mounting, and Detective Hayes felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to come together. But without Emily, the case remained frustratingly incomplete. The detective was determined to uncover the truth, knowing that the facade of the perfect honeymoon was hiding something far more sinister. The financial investigation into David Reynolds' affairs revealed a cascade of deceit. Detective Hayes and his team uncovered a complex network of bank accounts, hidden assets, and dubious transactions. David's financial empire, once thought to be thriving, was crumbling under the weight of risky investments and substantial debts. As Hayes delved deeper, he discovered that David had been involved in several questionable business ventures. One such venture was a failed real estate development in Florida, which had resulted in significant losses for investors. Another was a tech startup that went bankrupt, leaving David with substantial debts. These ventures, combined with his gambling habits, had drained his resources and left him in a precarious financial position. David's secret debts and business failures provided a possible motive for foul play. With Emily's disappearance, questions arose about potential life insurance policies or other financial benefits he might gain. Hayes' team found that David had recently taken out a substantial life insurance policy on Emily, raising further suspicions. Testimonies from friends and colleagues about David's character began to form a consistent narrative. They described him as someone who would do anything to maintain his image of success, even if it meant deceiving those closest to him. Emily, it seemed, had been drawn into a web of lies and financial manipulation. The mounting evidence suggested that David's involvement in Emily's disappearance was more than just circumstantial. His financial desperation, coupled with the inconsistencies in his story, pointed to a more sinister motive. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes knew that the key to solving the case lay in uncovering the full extent of David's deceit and the secrets he had worked so hard to conceal. As the investigation deepened, another layer of David Reynolds' double life began to unfold. His extramarital affairs, Detectives uncovered a series of clandestine relationships that painted a picture of a man far different from the devoted husband he appeared to be. David's phone records and emails revealed communications with several women, some of whom he had met through his business dealings, while others were casual encounters. These relationships ranged from fleeting flings to more serious entanglements. Detective Hayes and his team meticulously tracked down and interviewed these women, each conversation revealing more about David's deceptive nature. One of the women, Laura Mitchell, a marketing executive from New York, provided crucial insight. She described her relationship with David as passionate but tumultuous. They had met at a conference a year before his wedding, and their affair continued well into his engagement with Emily. Laura was unaware of David's upcoming marriage until she saw the wedding announcement on social media. Feeling betrayed, she ended their relationship but kept records of their communications, which she willingly shared with the investigators. Another woman, Jessica Evans, a real estate agent from Miami, had a similar story. She and David had met during one of his business trips, and their affair was marked by lavish gifts and extravagant promises. Jessica, too, was in the dark about David's marital status. She described him as attentive and affectionate, but noted his tendency to vanish for days without explanation. The most damning testimony came from Rachel Turner, a colleague from his firm who had been involved with David for nearly 2 years. Rachel's account revealed a pattern of manipulation and deceit. She recounted how David had confided in her about his financial troubles, painting himself as a victim of unfortunate circumstances. Rachel, deeply infatuated with him, had even loaned him money on several occasions, believing his promises to repay her once his investments paid off. These revelations had a profound impact on the case. They not only established a pattern of deceit, but also suggested potential motives for Emily's disappearance. David's affairs indicated a man capable of maintaining multiple lives, each carefully compartmentalized to prevent discovery. His ability to juggle these relationships while hiding his financial troubles from Emily spoke to his skill at deception. Interviews with his past lovers painted a picture of a man driven by a need for validation and material success. They described how David would often speak of his ambitions and dreams, using his charm to elicit sympathy and support. His relationships, both romantic and financial, were tools he used to navigate his increasingly precarious life. The impact of these revelations on the case was significant. They provided a motive for foul play, suggesting that David might have seen Emily as both an obstacle and a solution to his problems. With his financial empire collapsing and his web of lies unraveling, the pressure on David had reached a breaking point. Emily's disappearance and the subsequent focus on David threatened to expose his entire charade. As Detective Hayes pieced together the evidence, it became clear that the investigation was far from straightforward. Each new discovery added complexity to the case, revealing the depths of David's deceit and the lengths he was willing to go to maintain his facade. The true challenge lay in proving his involvement beyond doubt, a task that required uncovering every hidden aspect of his life. Just when Detective Hayes believed he had a clear picture of David Reynolds' involvement in Emily's disappearance, a shocking twist emerged. A mysterious figure, previously unknown to the investigation, came forward with information that turned the case on its head. The figure was a man named Alex Carter, a private investigator from New York. Alex contacted Detective Hayes, claiming to have crucial information about David Reynolds and his activities. Intrigued and cautious, Hayes arranged a meeting. In a dimly lit cafe, Alex revealed his connection to the case. Alex explained that he had been hired by an anonymous client to investigate David Reynolds months before Emily's disappearance. His client had suspected David of financial misconduct and infidelity, and Alex's investigation had uncovered significant evidence of both. He had been tracking David's movements and communications, documenting his secret affairs and shady business dealings. But Alex's most startling revelation was about Emily. According to his findings, Emily had discovered David's infidelity and financial troubles shortly before their wedding. She had confided in a close friend, expressing her doubts and fears about marrying David. This friend, concerned for Emily's safety, had anonymously hired Alex to gather evidence, hoping to give Emily a way out of her situation. Alex provided Detective Hayes with a dossier of his findings, including photographs, financial records, and transcripts of conversations. One particularly damning piece of evidence was a recording of a conversation between David and an unknown associate discussing plans that hinted at foul play. The recording suggested that David had been plotting something sinister, although the details were vague. This new information complicated the case significantly. It introduced the possibility that Emily might have been aware of David's plans and had taken steps to protect herself. Detective Hayes considered the idea that Emily could have staged her disappearance to escape David's clutches, although the lack of concrete evidence made this theory difficult to prove. Hayes decided to re-interview everyone involved, armed with the new information. He spoke again with Emily's family and friends, uncovering more details about her state of mind before the wedding. Emily's best friend, Lisa, revealed that Emily had been increasingly anxious in the weeks leading up to the honeymoon. She had confided in Lisa about her fears and mentioned the anonymous tipster who had warned her about David. David's reaction to the reopened investigation was one of surprise and agitation. He denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and dismissed the evidence provided by Alex Carter as fabrications. However, his growing frustration and inconsistent statements only added to the suspicion surrounding him. The twist in the case forced Detective Hayes to consider all possibilities. He intensified the search for Emily, exploring the idea that she might have gone into hiding. The investigation expanded to include airports, border crossings, and potential safe houses. The media coverage, once focused solely on David, began to speculate about Emily's fate and her possible role in the unfolding drama. As the investigation continued, Detective Hayes faced mounting pressure to solve the case. The new information from Alex Carter provided valuable leads, but it also complicated the narrative, making it harder to distinguish between victim and perpetrator. Hayes knew that the truth lay somewhere within the tangled web of deceit and betrayal, and he was determined to unravel it. The investigation into Emily Parker's disappearance stretched on for months, with Detective Hayes and his team following every lead, no matter how tenuous. The case had become a national obsession, with the media closely monitoring every development. Public opinion was divided. Some believed David Reynolds was guilty of foul play, while others speculated that Emily had staged her own disappearance to escape a troubled marriage. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A hiker in a remote part of St. Lucia discovered a makeshift campsite hidden in the dense jungle. Among the belongings were items that matched the descriptions of Emily's possessions, including a distinctive bracelet she was known to wear. The discovery reignited the investigation, with search teams scouring the area for further clues. Eventually, they found Emily. She was alive but severely dehydrated and disoriented. Emily had indeed staged her disappearance, driven by fear and desperation, after uncovering David's deceit and feeling trapped in the marriage. She had fled into the jungle, intending to disappear entirely, but the harsh conditions had taken a toll on her health. Emily's rescue brought a mix of relief and outrage. While many were glad she was safe, questions about her actions and the trauma she endured dominated the public discourse. Detective Hayes interviewed Emily extensively, piecing together her story. She described the mounting pressure she felt after discovering David's infidelities and financial troubles. The anonymous tip from Alex Carter had been the final straw, prompting her to take drastic action. David Reynolds was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit harm. The evidence provided by Alex Carter, combined with Emily's testimony, built a strong case against him. During the trial, the full extent of David's deceit was laid bare. His financial empire had been a house of cards, supported by lies and illegal activities. The jury found him guilty on all counts, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The aftermath of the case left lasting scars on everyone involved. Emily returned to Maplewood, where she began the long process of healing with the support of her family and friends. She became an advocate for domestic abuse victims, sharing her story to help others in similar situations. The media's fascination with her life eventually faded, but Emily remained a symbol of resilience and survival. Detective Hayes reflected on the case as one of the most challenging of his career. It had been a journey through layers of deception and human frailty, revealing the dark complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. The resolution, while not entirely satisfying, brought a measure of justice and closure to those affected. In the end, the case of Emily Parker's disappearance was a stark reminder that truth can be stranger than fiction, and that beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives, there can lie a twisted web of secrets waiting to be uncovered. The Carson family lived in a picturesque suburban neighborhood, the kind with neatly trimmed lawns, white picket fences, and an aura of tranquility. Richard Carson, a well-respected accountant, and his wife, Sophia, a beloved elementary school teacher, seemed to embody the perfect American dream. They had 2 children, Anna and Tyler, who were the pride and joy of their parents. One crisp autumn morning, the facade of perfection shattered. Richard Carson returned home from a weekend fishing trip with his friends to find the house eerily silent. The usual warmth and cheer were absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. He called out for Sophia but received no response. Anxiety gnawed at him as he climbed the stairs to their bedroom. The sight that greeted him was every husband's nightmare. Sophia lay motionless on the bed, her skin a pale hue that contrasted starkly with the dark dried blood staining the sheets. Richard's heart pounded as he rushed to her side, desperately trying to shake her awake. It was futile. Sophia was gone. Richard's frantic call to 911 brought the police and paramedics rushing to the scene. They confirmed what Richard already knew. Sophia Carson was dead. The initial investigation began, with officers combing through the house for clues. Richard was in shock, barely able to process the questions thrown his way. Detective Sarah McMillan, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for her keen instincts, took charge of the case. She quickly established that there were no signs of forced entry, suggesting that Sophia knew her attacker. As the investigation progressed, Richard's alibi was scrutinized. His fishing buddies corroborated his story, placing him miles away at the time of Sophia's death. The community was in disbelief. The Carsons had always appeared to be the perfect couple, deeply in love and committed to their family. But as the days passed, whispers of Richard's suspected infidelity began to surface. Sophia's best friend Laura mentioned that Sophia had confided in her about her fears that Richard was cheating. This revelation cast a shadow of suspicion over Richard, despite his solid alibi. The media quickly picked up the story, painting a picture of a troubled marriage and a potential crime of passion. The pressure mounted on the police to solve the case, but with Richard's airtight alibi, they were at a loss. It was then that Sophia's sister, Megan, decided to take matters into her own hands. She hired a private investigator, Jake Thompson, to dig deeper into Sophia's suspicions and uncover the truth behind her sister's death. Richard and Sophia Carson's love story began in high school. They were the quintessential sweethearts, inseparable and deeply in love. After graduation, they went to college together, got married, and started a family. Their life seemed like a fairy tale, filled with love, success, and 2 beautiful children. Richard's career as an accountant flourished, and Sophia found her calling as a teacher. They were well liked in their community, active in local events, and always seen together at neighborhood gatherings. But beneath the surface, Sophia harbored growing suspicions about her husband's fidelity. It started with small things: late nights at the office, unexplained phone calls, and Richard's increasing emotional distance. Sophia confided in her best friend Laura, sharing her fears and doubts. Laura advised her to confront Richard, but Sophia was hesitant. She didn't want to believe that the man she loved could betray her. As months turned into years, Sophia's suspicions deepened. She found herself checking Richard's phone when he wasn't looking, scrutinizing his behavior for any signs of infidelity. Her anxiety grew, casting a shadow over her once happy marriage. She often asked Laura if she was overreacting, but Laura could see the toll it was taking on her friend. One evening, Sophia found a lipstick stain on Richard's collar. It was the final straw. She confronted him, demanding the truth. Richard denied any wrongdoing, insisting that it was a misunderstanding. He claimed he was loyal and devoted, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. Their arguments became more frequent and intense. Sophia felt trapped in a web of doubt and mistrust, while Richard grew increasingly frustrated with her accusations. In her darkest moments, Sophia wondered if she was losing her mind. She contemplated hiring a private investigator, but feared what she might discover. Instead, she continued to confide in Laura, who remained her steadfast support. Laura, concerned for her friend's well-being, suggested they document everything. Sophia began keeping a journal, recording every suspicious incident, every fight, and every moment of doubt. She hoped that if the truth ever came out, she would have the evidence to confront Richard once and for all. Sophia's sister, Megan, was also aware of the tensions in the Carson household. She had always been close to Sophia and noticed the changes in her demeanor. Megan urged Sophia to take action, but Sophia remained paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. As the months passed, Sophia's suspicions became an all-consuming obsession. She couldn't escape the nagging feeling that her husband was leading a double life. It was this unrelenting doubt that ultimately led Megan to hire Jake Thompson, determined to uncover the truth and bring justice for her sister. Detective Sarah McMillan's team worked tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to Sophia Carson's death. They interviewed family, friends, and neighbors, trying to build a profile of Sophia's life and the possible motives for her murder. Richard's cooperation was noted, but his solid alibi kept him out of immediate suspicion. Megan, desperate for answers, turned to private investigator Jake Thompson. Jake was known for his tenacity and skill in uncovering hidden truths. With a career spanning over 2 decades, he had a reputation for solving the most challenging cases. When Megan approached him, he listened intently to her concerns about Richard's infidelity and Sophia's suspicions. Jake agreed to take the case, starting with a thorough review of Sophia's journal. The detailed entries painted a picture of a woman tormented by doubt and fear. Sophia's descriptions of Richard's behavior and her growing anxiety provided Jake with valuable insights into the possible cracks in their seemingly perfect marriage. Jake's first step was to delve into Richard's background. He conducted surveillance, followed Richard to work, and monitored his interactions. Richard appeared to be a devoted father and professional, but Jake knew better than to take things at face value. Interviews with Sophia's friends and colleagues revealed a woman who was deeply loved and respected. They spoke of her kindness, dedication to her students, and the love she had for her family. But they also mentioned the changes they had seen in her over the past few years. Laura, Sophia's best friend, was a crucial source of information. She shared the details of Sophia's fears and the confrontations she had with Richard. Laura also mentioned a woman named Carla Mason, a former colleague of Richard's who had once been very close to him. Sophia had always been wary of Carla, suspecting her of having an affair with Richard. Jake's investigation led him to Carla Mason. He dug into her background, uncovering a series of troubling details. Carla had a history of unstable relationships and a reputation for being manipulative. She had left the company where she worked with Richard under mysterious circumstances, and Jake's instincts told him there was more to the story. As Jake pieced together the puzzle, he began to see a pattern. Carla's presence in Richard's life, Sophia's escalating suspicions, and the sudden violent end to Sophia's life were all connected. He knew he was onto something significant, but he needed concrete evidence to prove Carla's involvement. Jake intensified his surveillance on Carla, watching her every move. He interviewed her acquaintances, piecing together a profile of a woman driven by jealousy and obsession. It became clear that Carla harbored a deep resentment towards Sophia, viewing her as the obstacle to her happiness with Richard. With the pieces falling into place, Jake prepared to confront Carla, determined to uncover the truth and bring justice for Sophia Carson. Jake Thompson was no stranger to the darker side of human nature. With years of experience as a private investigator, he had seen it all: infidelity, fraud, even murder. But the Carson case had a complexity that intrigued him. As he delved deeper, the tangled web of deceit and betrayal began to unravel. Richard Carson, on the surface, was a model husband and father, but Jake's investigation revealed another side to him. Richard had indeed been unfaithful, and his affair with Carla Mason was more than a fleeting indiscretion. Carla Mason was a striking woman in her early 30s, with a magnetic presence that drew people to her. She had met Richard when they both worked at the same accounting firm. Their affair began innocently enough, with shared lunches and late-night conversations, but it quickly escalated into a passionate and clandestine relationship. Jake's surveillance provided him with the evidence he needed. He captured photos of Richard and Carla meeting in secret, their intimate moments betraying the depth of their connection. But it wasn't just the affair that caught Jake's attention. It was Carla's behavior. She was possessive, obsessive, and clearly driven by a desire to replace Sophia in Richard's life. Jake's investigation into Carla's past revealed a troubled history. She had grown up in a dysfunctional family, with a mother who was emotionally distant and a series of abusive relationships. These experiences had left Carla with deep emotional scars and a desperate need for validation and love. When she met Richard, she saw him as her ticket to a better life, a chance to escape her past and find happiness. But Carla's obsession with Richard took a dark turn when she realized he would never leave Sophia. Despite Richard's promises and assurances, he remained with his wife, further fueling Carla's resentment. She began to see Sophia as the obstacle standing between her and the life she desired. Her jealousy grew, and with it, a dangerous resolve. Jake's breakthrough came when he discovered a series of emails between Carla and Richard. In them, Carla expressed her frustration and anger, accusing Richard of leading her on and demanding that he leave Sophia. Richard's responses were apologetic, but non-committal, indicating his reluctance to abandon his family. One email in particular stood out. It was sent a week before Sophia's death. Carla had written a long emotional message, threatening to expose their affair if Richard didn't take action. She hinted at a plan to remove Sophia from the picture, a chilling foreshadowing of the tragedy that would soon unfold. Armed with this evidence, Jake intensified his efforts to link Carla directly to the crime. He interviewed her former colleagues and friends, uncovering a pattern of manipulative and unstable behavior. They described Carla as someone who would go to great lengths to get what she wanted, often using deceit and emotional manipulation to achieve her goals. One colleague in particular provided a crucial piece of information. He recalled a conversation with Carla where she had fantasized about a life with Richard, free from the constraints of his marriage. She had spoken with a chilling detachment about the possibility of Sophia disappearing, a comment that now took on a sinister significance. Jake knew he was close. He gathered all the evidence he had collected and prepared to confront Carla. He needed her to confess, to break under the weight of the truth. Carla Mason's affair with Richard Carson had started with innocent flirtation and grown into a full-blown obsession. She had fallen hard for Richard, seeing him as her escape from a life of loneliness and pain. But as their relationship deepened, so did her jealousy and desire to replace Sophia Carson. The affair began 3 years prior, at an office holiday party. Richard, charming and attentive, had noticed Carla sitting alone and struck up a conversation. They found common ground in their love for their work and shared frustrations about their personal lives. Richard confided in Carla about his strained marriage, while Carla shared her dreams of finding true love. Their connection was instant and electric. Soon they were meeting for lunches, then dinners, and finally secret rendezvous at hotels. Richard was careful to keep their affair hidden, but Carla's feelings for him grew stronger with each passing day. She fantasized about a future where they could be together openly, free from the constraints of his marriage. Carla's fantasies, however, were marred by the reality of Sophia's existence. Every time Richard went home to his wife, Carla's resentment festered. She started to view Sophia as the obstacle to her happiness, the barrier standing between her and the life she wanted with Richard. Carla's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would call Richard at all hours, demanding to know where he was and who he was with. She became possessive, monitoring his social media and showing up unannounced at his office. Richard, initially flattered by her attention, began to feel trapped by her neediness. The breaking point came when Carla discovered that Richard had lied to her about spending a weekend with Sophia. Enraged, she confronted him, demanding that he choose between her and his wife. Richard, caught off guard by her intensity, tried to calm her down. He promised he would leave Sophia, but deep down he knew he couldn't follow through. As Carla's obsession grew, so did her hatred for Sophia. She started to stalk her, learning her routines and habits. Carla would drive by the Carson house late at night, watching from the shadows as Sophia went about her life. Her anger boiled over as she saw the life she wanted being lived by another woman. Carla's plan to remove Sophia took shape over several months. She began to fantasize about ways to eliminate her rival, her thoughts growing darker and more dangerous. The email she sent to Richard, threatening to expose their affair, was a desperate attempt to force his hand. But when he failed to act, Carla decided to take matters into her own hands. On the night of the murder, Carla waited until she knew Richard was away on his fishing trip. She had meticulously planned every detail, from disabling the security cameras to ensuring she left no trace of her presence. She broke into the Carson house using a spare key Richard had given her, moving silently through the darkened rooms. Sophia was asleep when Carla entered the bedroom. The sight of her rival, peaceful and unaware, fueled Carla's rage. She approached the bed, a knife clutched tightly in her hand. Sophia woke up just as Carla lunged, but it was too late. The attack was swift and brutal, driven by years of pent-up anger and resentment. After the deed was done, Carla stood over Sophia's lifeless body, a mixture of triumph and horror washing over her. She had done it. She had removed the obstacle to her happiness. But as the adrenaline faded, the reality of her actions set in. She quickly wiped down the surfaces she had touched, making sure to leave no evidence behind. Then she slipped out of the house and disappeared into the night. Carla believed she had committed the perfect crime, but Jake Thompson's investigation unraveled her carefully constructed alibi. His surveillance and interviews revealed the depth of her obsession and the length she had gone to in order to be with Richard. The evidence he gathered painted a chilling picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and willing to kill to get what she wanted. As Jake prepared to confront Carla, he knew that her fragile psyche would be her undoing. The weight of her guilt, combined with the mountain of evidence against her, would be too much for her to bear. It was only a matter of time before she broke under the pressure and confessed to her heinous crime. Jake Thompson meticulously gathered the evidence needed to build an airtight case against Carla Mason. He knew that to secure a conviction, every detail had to be scrutinized and every lead followed. His investigation had revealed Carla's obsessive behavior, her deep-seated resentment towards Sophia, and the length she went to in order to be with Richard. Now it was time to piece it all together. Jake's first task was to consolidate the surveillance footage and photographs he had taken of Carla and Richard. The images clearly showed their intimate relationship, disproving any claims that Carla might make about their affair being over. These visual proofs were crucial in establishing Carla's motive. Next, Jake focused on the emails between Carla and Richard. The threatening messages Carla had sent, demanding that Richard leave Sophia or face the consequences, were damning evidence of her intent. Jake printed out the emails, highlighting the passages where Carla hinted at drastic measures if she didn't get her way. Jake also gathered testimonies from Carla's former colleagues and acquaintances. One witness, a close friend of Carla's, reluctantly shared a conversation they had just days before Sophia's murder. Carla had expressed a disturbing desire for Sophia to disappear, even making offhand remarks about how easy it would be to make it happen. This testimony painted a clear picture of Carla's premeditation. The most crucial piece of evidence, however, came from the crime scene itself. Jake had worked closely with Detective Sarah McMillan, sharing his findings and collaborating on the investigation. Forensic analysis revealed traces of Carla's DNA on the knife used to kill Sophia, as well as on the bedroom door handle. Despite her efforts to clean up, Carla had made critical mistakes that tied her directly to the murder. Jake and Sarah also discovered a partial fingerprint on the windowsill where Carla had entered the house. While it wasn't a complete match, it added to the mounting evidence against her. Jake knew that these physical proofs, combined with the digital and testimonial evidence, created a compelling case. With everything in place, Jake turned his attention to Carla's acquaintances. He interviewed neighbors, friends, and even casual acquaintances, piecing together a profile of a woman driven by desperation and jealousy. One neighbor recalled seeing Carla's car parked near the Carson house on several occasions, further corroborating her stalking behavior. The final piece of the puzzle came from a surprising source. Richard, racked with guilt and realizing the extent of Carla's obsession, agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. He provided additional emails and messages from Carla, as well as his own account of their relationship. Richard's testimony was crucial in establishing the timeline and confirming Carla's motives. Jake presented his findings to Detective McMillan, who was impressed by the thoroughness of the investigation. Together, they compiled a detailed report outlining Carla's motives, actions, and the overwhelming evidence against her. The case was ready to go to trial. Carla was arrested at her apartment, her shocked expression revealing her belief that she had gotten away with murder. As the police led her away in handcuffs, Jake felt a sense of satisfaction. He had uncovered the truth and ensured that justice would be served for Sophia Carson. The legal proceedings were swift. Carla's defense tried to argue that she had been framed, but the evidence was irrefutable. The emails, the forensic evidence, and the testimonies painted a clear picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and willing to kill to achieve her desires. In the end, Carla was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Richard's involvement, though not criminal, left a stain on his reputation and devastated his family. The Carson children, Anna and Tyler, faced a future without their mother and with a father whose actions had indirectly led to her death. In the quiet aftermath of the trial, those left behind struggled to find a sense of normalcy. The Carson family's once bright future was now overshadowed by loss and betrayal. Sophia's absence was a constant presence in their lives, a void that could never be filled. Megan, Sophia's sister, took on the role of guardian for Anna and Tyler. She moved into the Carson home, providing stability and support for the children. Megan's bond with her niece and nephew deepened as they navigated their shared grief. Together, they honored Sophia's memory, finding comfort in the love she had given them. Laura, Sophia's best friend, also played a crucial role in helping the family heal. She organized memorial events, celebrating Sophia's life and the impact she had on those around her. The community rallied together, offering support and love to the Carson children, ensuring they knew they were not alone. Richard, burdened by guilt and remorse, sought therapy to confront his actions and the consequences they had wrought. He knew he could never undo the pain he had caused, but he hoped to find a path to redemption. Richard's journey was one of self-reflection and accountability, a long and difficult process of coming to terms with his past. As the years passed, Anna and Tyler grew up, carrying with them the lessons of their mother's life and the strength of their Aunt Megan's love. They pursued their dreams, determined to honor Sophia's memory through their actions and achievements. The scars of their past remained, but they found ways to move forward, holding on to the positive memories of their family. The Carson case, with all its twists and tragedies, became a beacon of resilience for the community. It reminded them of the fragility of life and the strength that could be found in unity and support. John Anderson, a well-respected local businessman, was found dead under mysterious circumstances in his home. The news spread like wildfire, leaving the townspeople in shock and disbelief. John's body was discovered by his wife, Lisa Anderson, who called the police in a state of frantic distress. The scene that awaited the detectives was both perplexing and chilling. John lay motionless in the living room, with no visible signs of struggle or forced entry. The initial examination suggested a sudden and unexplained death, but something felt off to the seasoned investigators. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective James Carter, were assigned to the case. Both experienced and diligent, they knew that in a small town like Brooksville, everyone had their secrets, and sometimes those secrets could be deadly. As they began their investigation, the townsfolk watched with bated breath, eager to know what had happened to one of their own. Rumors began to swirl as the community speculated about the cause of John's untimely demise. Some whispered about his business dealings, while others hinted at personal troubles. Little did they know that the truth was far more sinister and tangled than they could ever imagine. As the detectives delved deeper into John's life and relationships, they uncovered a web of deceit, betrayal, and hidden motives that pointed to a shocking conclusion. John Anderson was a man of many facets. At 45, he had built a successful career as the owner of a local hardware store, Anderson's Supplies, which had been a staple in Brooksville for over 2 decades. Known for his generosity and commitment to the community, John was a beloved figure in town. He often donated to local charities and sponsored youth sports teams, earning him a reputation as a pillar of Brooksville society. Despite his public persona, those who knew John well were aware of his private struggles. His marriage to Lisa had been under strain for several years. The couple had met in college and married young, but over time the passion had waned, replaced by routine and occasional arguments. Friends described John as hardworking and dedicated, but also as someone who could be distant and absorbed in his work. John's last known activities painted a picture of a man entrenched in his routine. He had spent the previous day at his store, attending to customers and managing inventory. He left work at his usual time, stopped briefly at a local diner for a cup of coffee, and then headed home. Surveillance footage confirmed that he arrived at his house at 6:45 p.m. That evening, John had planned to spend a quiet night with Lisa, watching television and discussing their upcoming vacation. However, Lisa reported that John had complained of feeling unwell shortly after dinner. He had retired to the living room to rest, and that was the last time she saw him alive. When she went to check on him later, she found him unresponsive and called 911. The initial autopsy report was inconclusive. There were no obvious signs of trauma or foul play, and toxicology results were pending. Detectives Miller and Carter knew that they had to dig deeper into John's life to uncover any potential clues that could explain his sudden death. They began by interviewing Lisa and those closest to John, hoping to piece together the events leading up to that fateful night. Lisa Anderson was the picture of grief when the detectives first interviewed her. At 42, she was a striking woman with auburn hair and piercing blue eyes, now red-rimmed from crying. Her distress seemed genuine, but Miller and Carter knew better than to take things at face value. They needed to understand her relationship with John and her potential role in his death. Lisa worked as a marketing manager for a local real estate firm, a job she had taken up after their two children, Jake and Emily, went off to college. Described by friends as outgoing and charismatic, Lisa was well liked in the community. However, some noted that her marriage to John had been rocky. There were rumors of arguments and a growing emotional distance between them. When questioned about the night of John's death, Lisa recounted her version of events with a tremor in her voice. She described how John had complained of feeling ill after dinner and had decided to lie down in the living room. She had given him some space, thinking he needed rest, and had gone upstairs to read. Hours later, when she didn't hear from him, she went downstairs and found him unresponsive. Lisa's reaction to John's death was complex. She expressed deep sorrow and a sense of loss, but also hinted at frustrations that had simmered beneath the surface of their marriage. She admitted that they had been going through a rough patch, but she insisted that she loved John and had hoped to work through their issues. As the detectives delved deeper, they noticed subtle inconsistencies in Lisa's statements. She seemed hesitant when discussing certain aspects of her relationship with John, and there were moments when her grief appeared almost performative. Miller and Carter decided to explore further, focusing on Lisa's personal life and relationships outside her marriage. Their investigation soon led them to Mark Benson, Lisa's co-worker. Initial inquiries revealed that Lisa and Mark had been spending a lot of time together, both in and out of the office. The nature of their relationship raised eyebrows, and the detectives suspected that there was more to the story than Lisa had let on. With this new lead, they began to unravel the threads of an affair that would cast a dark shadow over John's death and point to possible motives that were previously unseen. Detectives Miller and Carter arrived at the Anderson residence the morning after John's body was discovered. The house, a modest two-story home on Maple Street, was cordoned off with police tape. Forensic teams were already at work, meticulously combing through every inch of the property for clues. Miller, a seasoned detective with a keen eye for detail, started her examination in the living room where John's body had been found. The room was neat, almost eerily so. John lay on the couch, his face serene as if he were merely asleep. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious wounds or marks on his body. The initial assessment by the medical examiner suggested that John had died of unknown causes, pending a full autopsy. Carter, Miller's partner, was outside speaking with the first responders. A burly man with a no-nonsense attitude, he had a knack for getting people to talk. He gathered statements from the paramedics and the patrol officers who had first arrived at the scene. None of them had seen anything out of the ordinary, and there were no immediate signs of forced entry or foul play. Inside, Miller turned her attention to Lisa, who sat at the kitchen table clutching a tissue. Lisa's hands trembled as she recounted the events of the previous night. Her story was consistent with what she had told the 911 operator. John had felt unwell, and she had left him to rest, only to find him unresponsive later. Miller noted the way Lisa's eyes darted around the room, avoiding direct contact. As they wrapped up their initial interviews, Miller and Carter spoke with several neighbors. Most described the Andersons as a quiet couple who kept to themselves. A few mentioned hearing arguments on occasion, but nothing that had raised significant alarm. One neighbor, Mrs. Evans, an elderly widow who lived next door, recalled seeing John the evening before. He had seemed his usual self, waving as he walked to his front door. Back at the station, the detectives reviewed their notes. They compiled a list of potential witnesses and persons of interest, starting with Lisa and expanding to friends, family, and co-workers. The preliminary evidence didn't point clearly in any direction, but Miller and Carter were determined to leave no stone unturned. Forensic analysis began to yield some results. The autopsy confirmed that John had not suffered from any external injuries. Toxicology tests, however, revealed trace amounts of a foreign substance in his system. This finding raised new questions about whether John's death was natural or if he had been deliberately poisoned. The detectives considered the possibility of an accidental overdose, but decided to focus on investigating any potential foul play. Meanwhile, Miller and Carter continued to scrutinize Lisa's behavior and background. They requested her phone records and financial statements, looking for any anomalies. Lisa's initial shock and sorrow seemed genuine, but the detectives knew that grief could mask many things. They needed to understand her motives, her relationships, and her state of mind in the weeks leading up to John's death. Their investigation soon took a critical turn when they discovered a series of text messages between Lisa and her co-worker, Mark Benson. The messages hinted at a relationship that was far more intimate than just colleagues. This revelation provided a new perspective on the case and prompted the detectives to delve deeper into Lisa's affair with Mark, exploring how it might connect to John's untimely demise. The discovery of Lisa's affair with Mark Benson was a turning point in the investigation. The text messages between them were explicit and left little doubt about the nature of their relationship. Mark, a suave and charming man in his early 40s, worked with Lisa at the real estate firm, and it was clear that their connection went beyond professional boundaries. Detectives Miller and Carter decided to bring Lisa in for a second round of questioning. This time, they confronted her with the evidence of her affair. Lisa initially denied any wrongdoing, but when presented with the text messages, she broke down. Through tears, she admitted to the affair, claiming that it had started several months earlier. She insisted, however, that it had nothing to do with John's death. Lisa explained that she had felt lonely and unappreciated in her marriage. John had become increasingly distant, more focused on his business than on their relationship. She sought comfort and companionship in Mark, who was attentive and understanding. The affair had been an escape, a way for her to feel alive again, but she maintained that she had never wanted any harm to come to John. Miller and Carter knew that affairs could be powerful motivators for murder, but they needed more concrete evidence to link Lisa or Mark to John's death. They decided to bring Mark in for questioning. Mark was cooperative but nervous. He confirmed the affair, describing it as a whirlwind romance that had provided solace to both him and Lisa. He claimed that he had no knowledge of John's death and had been at home on the night it happened, a fact that they would need to verify. As the detectives delved deeper into the affair, they discovered that Lisa and Mark had been planning to start a new life together. Emails and further text messages revealed discussions about leaving Brooksville and moving to a different city. They had even looked into potential properties and job opportunities elsewhere. This painted a picture of a couple desperate to escape their current lives, raising further suspicions about their involvement in John's death. The affair added a layer of complexity to the case. Lisa's motive seemed clear. If she were free from her marriage, she could be with Mark without the stigma of divorce in their conservative community. However, Miller and Carter needed to establish a link between the affair and John's death. They began by re-examining the toxicology report, looking for any substances that could be traced back to Lisa or Mark. The detectives also started to scrutinize Mark's background more closely. They discovered that he had a history of financial troubles and had recently been involved in a legal dispute with a former employer. This revelation suggested that Mark might have had his own motives for wanting John out of the picture, particularly if he believed that Lisa could provide financial stability. With these new leads, Miller and Carter were determined to uncover the truth. They needed to build a case that connected the dots between the affair, the motives, and the opportunity for either Lisa or Mark to have orchestrated John's death. The stakes were high, and the pressure was mounting. But the detectives were resolute in their pursuit of justice. Mark Benson presented himself as a confident and composed individual, but under the scrutiny of the detectives, cracks began to appear in his facade. Mark was a real estate agent who had joined the same firm as Lisa a year prior. At 41, he was known for his charm and persuasive skills, which had earned him a reputation as one of the top agents in Brooksville. However, his personal life was far less stable. During his interview, Mark maintained that his relationship with Lisa was purely about mutual emotional support. He admitted to falling in love with her, but insisted that they had no plans to harm John. He claimed to have been at his apartment on the night of John's death, providing an alibi that the detectives would need to verify. As Miller and Carter dug into Mark's background, they found several red flags. Mark had moved to Brooksville after a series of failed business ventures in larger cities. He had accumulated significant debt and had been sued by a former business partner over a failed investment. Financial records showed that Mark was living beyond his means, struggling to keep up with his debts and maintain his lifestyle. Further investigation into Mark's phone records and emails revealed frequent, secretive communications with Lisa. They often discussed their dissatisfaction with their current lives and fantasized about a future together. In one particularly revealing email, Mark wrote about his desperation to start anew and his frustration with the obstacles in their way. While this was not direct evidence of a murder plot, it added to the narrative that he had a strong motive to eliminate John. The detectives also uncovered that Mark had recently taken out a sizable life insurance policy on himself, naming Lisa as the beneficiary. This discovery was particularly suspicious, suggesting that Mark might have been planning for a future that included financial security, possibly derived from Lisa's newfound widowhood. To verify Mark's alibi, Miller and Carter visited his apartment complex. The building manager confirmed that Mark had been seen entering his apartment around 7 p.m. on the night of John's death, but there were no witnesses to confirm his presence there for the entire evening. This left a window of opportunity that the detectives couldn't ignore. As they continued to interrogate Mark, his story began to show inconsistencies. He stumbled over details about his whereabouts and interactions with Lisa. Miller and Carter pressed harder, using psychological tactics to unsettle him. Mark's composure started to fray, and he became increasingly defensive. In a tense moment during questioning, Mark blurted out that Lisa had been the one to suggest they could be together sooner if John were out of the picture. This accusation shifted the focus back to Lisa and raised questions about who was truly orchestrating the events leading up to John's death. Was Mark trying to deflect blame, or was there a more sinister conspiracy at play? With both Lisa and Mark under intense scrutiny, the detectives faced the challenge of untangling a web of lies, motives, and opportunities. They needed more concrete evidence to determine whether one or both of them were responsible for John's death. As they continued their investigation, they hoped that the next piece of the puzzle would bring them closer to the truth. As the investigation progressed, Miller and Carter encountered numerous twists and turns that complicated the case. New evidence surfaced, leading them down unexpected paths and challenging their initial assumptions. Each revelation brought them closer to the truth, but also raised more questions. One such twist came when the toxicology report was finalized. The foreign substance found in John's system was identified as a rare, fast-acting poison. This poison was not something one could easily acquire, pointing to a premeditated act rather than an accidental overdose. The detectives now had concrete evidence that John's death was a murder, and they needed to find out who had access to such a substance. Their inquiries led them to a local pharmacy where the poison had been purchased. The pharmacist remembered selling the substance to a man matching Mark's description, but there was no solid proof linking Mark directly to the purchase. This added another layer of suspicion, but was not enough to make an arrest. While following up on the lead at the pharmacy, the detectives received an anonymous tip. The caller claimed to have seen Lisa meeting with a man in a secluded park shortly before John's death. This information suggested that Lisa might have been plotting something clandestine, possibly involving Mark. The detectives traced the call, but found that it originated from a disposable phone, making it impossible to identify the source. Simultaneously, a surprising piece of evidence emerged from John's business dealings. Financial records indicated that John had recently transferred a significant sum of money to an unknown account. Further investigation revealed that this account belonged to a private investigator named Alex Thompson. When questioned, Thompson disclosed that John had hired him to follow Lisa, suspecting her of infidelity. This revelation painted a picture of a man who was not only aware of his wife's affair, but also taking steps to gather evidence. The private investigator's report included photos and detailed logs of Lisa's meetings with Mark. These documents confirmed the affair, but also contained troubling information about Lisa's behavior. According to Thompson, Lisa had been acting erratically in recent weeks, frequently discussing her unhappiness and expressing anger towards John. In one recorded conversation, she mentioned feeling trapped and hinted at wanting to escape her marriage by any means necessary. This new evidence prompted Miller and Carter to reevaluate their approach. They decided to conduct a thorough search of the Anderson home, hoping to find something that might link Lisa or Mark directly to the murder. During the search, they discovered a hidden compartment in Lisa's closet, containing vials of the same rare poison found in John's system. This discovery was damning and suggested Lisa's direct involvement in the crime. Confronted with this evidence, Lisa's demeanor shifted. She became defensive and hostile, accusing the detectives of trying to frame her. She insisted that she had no knowledge of the poison and that someone must have planted it to incriminate her. However, just as the detectives felt they were closing in on a resolution, another twist emerged. Mark Benson came forward with new information, claiming that Lisa had manipulated him into helping her acquire the poison. He provided emails and messages in which Lisa discussed her plan to poison John, making it appear as though Mark was a reluctant accomplice rather than the mastermind. With conflicting stories from Lisa and Mark, Miller and Carter faced a complex challenge. They needed to determine who was telling the truth and who was orchestrating a cover-up. The investigation had revealed a tangled web of deceit, motives, and opportunities, but the exact sequence of events leading to John's death remained elusive. Conversely, Mark's narrative painted him as a pawn in Lisa's scheme. He described how Lisa had gradually introduced the idea of poisoning John, making it seem like a desperate measure to free herself from an unbearable situation. He admitted to helping her obtain the poison, but insisted that he had never intended for John to die. His portrayal of Lisa as the mastermind added another layer of complexity to the case. To uncover the truth, the detectives decided to conduct a final round of intense interrogations. They hoped to catch one or both suspects in a lie, or reveal inconsistencies that could break the case wide open. Miller and Carter knew that the key to solving the murder lay in understanding the true nature of the relationship between Lisa and Mark and the depth of their motives. In a tense interview, Lisa finally broke down. She admitted that she had felt trapped in her marriage and saw no way out other than eliminating John. However, she insisted that Mark had been an active participant, encouraging her to go through with the plan. Her confession provided crucial insight into her state of mind and her willingness to commit murder to achieve her goals. With this new information, the detectives turned their attention back to Mark. They confronted him with Lisa's confession, hoping to provoke a reaction. Mark, realizing that his attempts to deflect blame were failing, began to unravel. He confessed to helping Lisa, but maintained that she had manipulated him from the start. The confessions from both suspects provided a clearer picture of the motives and events leading up to John's death. The detectives now had to piece together the final puzzle and determine how to proceed with arrests and charges, ensuring that justice would be served. The breakthrough in the case came when the detectives re-examined the timeline and physical evidence one last time. They discovered a crucial piece of evidence that had initially been overlooked: a security camera from a neighbor's house that captured a portion of the Andersons' backyard. The footage revealed Mark entering the Anderson home on the night of John's death, contradicting his alibi and providing a direct link between him and the crime scene. The jury deliberated for several days before returning a guilty verdict for both Lisa and Mark. Lisa was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Mark received a slightly lesser sentence due to his perceived secondary role in the crime. The community of Brooksville was left to grapple with the aftermath of the tragedy, but there was a sense of closure as justice had been served. John Harrison, a respected local businessman, was found murdered in his own home. The evidence soon pointed towards his wife, Emily, sparking a scandal that would unravel a complex web of lies, twisted love triangles, deceit, and dark secrets. Emily Harrison, a beautiful woman in her mid-30s, had always been the center of attention. Her previous marriage to Michael Turner had ended amicably, or so it seemed. John, her current husband, had a strained relationship with his younger brother, David. This strained dynamic hid deeper, more sinister connections that would come to light as the investigation unfolded. The murder of John Harrison was not a straightforward case. It was the catalyst that exposed a convoluted love triangle, revealing that everyone involved had motives buried beneath layers of pretense and propriety. Detective Sarah Miller and her partner, Detective Tom Reynolds, would soon find themselves entangled in a case that defied simple explanations. The night of the murder, Emily's scream pierced the quiet neighborhood. The first responders arrived at the Harrison residence to find Emily in a state of hysteria, her clothes stained with blood. John's body lay sprawled on the living room floor, a deep gash across his throat. Blood pooled around him, soaking into the carpet. The scene was chaotic, with furniture overturned and signs of a struggle evident. Officer Daniels, the first on the scene, quickly secured the area. He observed Emily, who was sobbing uncontrollably, clutching a framed photo of her and John. Her hands trembled as she tried to explain what had happened. "I found him like this. I came home and he was just lying there. I didn't know what to do." Her voice was shaky, her eyes wide with terror, but there was something in her demeanor that didn't quite add up. She was too composed, too rehearsed. Detective Miller arrived shortly after, her keen eyes taking in every detail. She noted the absence of forced entry and the fact that John seemed to have been caught off guard. It suggested that he knew his attacker. Miller's gut instinct told her that this was more than just a burglary gone wrong. As the forensic team began their work, Miller pulled Emily aside for a more detailed statement. Emily recounted her day, carefully avoiding eye contact. She claimed to have been out shopping and returned to find John dead. But there were inconsistencies in her story, small details that didn't align. Detective Reynolds joined Miller, his expression grim. He had spoken with the neighbors, who reported hearing raised voices earlier in the evening. None could identify the second voice, but it was clear that John had not been alone before his death. Miller looked at Reynolds. "This isn't a simple case, Tom. There's more to this than meets the eye." Reynolds nodded in agreement. "Let's dig deeper. Something tells me we're only scratching the surface." The investigation into John Harrison's murder kicked off in earnest the following day. Detectives Miller and Reynolds began their meticulous process of gathering evidence and conducting interviews. The first step was to build a timeline of John's final hours. They discovered that John had left his office around 5 p.m., a bit earlier than usual. His assistant mentioned that he seemed preoccupied, almost distracted. Emily's account placed her at the local mall during this time, but there were no security camera records to confirm her presence. Detective Miller focused on Emily's behavior. She seemed cooperative, yet there was an underlying current of tension. During questioning, Emily maintained her story but frequently glanced at her phone as if expecting a message or call. Miller made a mental note to check her phone records. Meanwhile, Reynolds delved into John's professional life. As a successful real estate developer, John had made a few enemies. Business rivals and disgruntled former employees formed a list of potential suspects. However, none seemed to have a motive strong enough for murder. As they dug deeper, the detectives learned more about Emily's past. Her previous marriage to Michael Turner had ended 5 years ago. The divorce was amicable on paper, but whispers of infidelity and financial disputes lingered. Michael had moved out of town but returned occasionally, supposedly to visit his daughter from another relationship. Detective Miller decided to pay Michael a visit. He lived in a modest apartment on the outskirts of Willow Creek. Michael was a tall, brooding man with a rugged charm. He appeared genuinely shocked when Miller informed him of John's murder. "Emily called me last night," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "She was hysterical, said John was dead. I told her to call the police and then I rushed over. But by the time I got there, the place was crawling with cops." Michael's alibi was shaky, but there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Miller noted his reaction and decided to keep him under surveillance. Back at the station, Reynolds had uncovered a new lead. David Harrison, John's younger brother, had been seen arguing with John several days before the murder. David, a charming but aimless man, had always lived in his brother's shadow. He harbored a deep resentment towards John, fueled by jealousy and financial dependence. David was brought in for questioning. He was visibly nervous, his eyes darting around the room as he spoke. "John and I argued about money," he admitted. "He was going to cut me off. But I didn't kill him." The detectives were skeptical. David's alibi for the night of the murder was weak. He claimed to have been at a bar, but no one could confirm his presence. As they continued to press him, David's story began to unravel. Emily's suspicious behavior, Michael's shaky alibi, and David's deep-seated resentment formed a tangled web. The detectives realized they were dealing with more than just a crime of passion. There were layers of deceit and hidden motives that needed to be peeled back, one by one. John and Emily Harrison appeared to be the quintessential suburban couple. They had a beautiful home, a successful business, and were well-liked in their community. But beneath the veneer of their perfect life, cracks were beginning to show. John had built his real estate empire from the ground up. He was known for his business acumen and ruthless negotiating tactics. However, his professional success came at a personal cost. John's demanding work schedule left little time for his marriage, creating a rift between him and Emily. Emily, on the other hand, had a more complex past. Raised in a wealthy family, she was accustomed to a life of privilege. Her first marriage to Michael Turner had been a whirlwind romance. Michael was a charismatic entrepreneur, but his business ventures often ended in failure. Their relationship was passionate but tumultuous, marked by frequent arguments and infidelity. The divorce had been bitter, with Emily accusing Michael of cheating and financial mismanagement. Michael, in turn, claimed that Emily's spending habits had driven him to the brink of bankruptcy. Despite the acrimony, they managed to part ways without too much public scandal. Michael left town, but he never completely severed ties with Emily. John entered Emily's life shortly after her divorce. He offered stability and security, something she desperately needed. Their courtship was swift, and they married within a year. However, the transition from a tumultuous relationship to a stable one was not easy for Emily. She missed the excitement and unpredictability that Michael had brought into her life. David Harrison, John's younger brother, was another significant figure in the unfolding drama. David had always been the black sheep of the family. He struggled with various addictions and had a string of failed business ventures. John often bailed him out, creating a sense of dependency and resentment. David's relationship with Emily was complex. They had an undeniable chemistry, and their interactions were often charged with unspoken tension. Emily confided in David about her marital problems, and he, in turn, found solace in her company. It was clear to the detectives that there was more to their relationship than met the eye. As Miller and Reynolds dug deeper, they discovered that John had recently made some significant financial moves. He had taken out a large life insurance policy and transferred substantial assets into Emily's name. These actions suggested that John was either planning for the future or anticipating something dire. Emily's spending habits had also come under scrutiny. Despite her outward appearance of concern and grief, her bank records revealed large withdrawals and unexplained expenses. The detectives began to suspect that she might have been planning to leave John and start a new life elsewhere. Michael Turner, though seemingly out of the picture, still harbored feelings for Emily. He had recently come back into town and had been seen meeting with her on several occasions. Their interactions were friendly on the surface, but there was an undercurrent of unresolved tension and unspoken words. The background checks painted a picture of a marriage on the brink, with each character hiding their true intentions behind a facade of normalcy. John was the pillar of the community, Emily the perfect wife, David the troubled brother, and Michael the ex-husband with lingering feelings. But as the detectives would soon discover, appearances could be deceiving. As the investigation progressed, the detectives focused on uncovering the motives behind John Harrison's murder. Each of the main players had reasons, both hidden and overt, that could drive them to such an extreme act. Emily's financial troubles were the most glaring. Despite John's success, their finances were strained. Emily's lavish lifestyle had put them in significant debt. The large life insurance policy John had recently taken out added a sinister layer to this financial stress. If Emily were to benefit from John's death, it would solve all her money problems. Emily's affair with David complicated matters further. Their relationship was more than just a fleeting romance. It was a deeply emotional bond, forged out of mutual dissatisfaction and dependency. Michael Turner also had a motive. His lingering feelings for Emily and the unresolved bitterness from their divorce created a volatile mix. Michael's financial instability made him susceptible to desperate measures. His frequent visits to Emily hinted at a rekindled relationship, which could have easily turned into a conspiracy against John. David's resentment towards his brother was well documented. He had lived in John's shadow for most of his life, relying on him for financial support. The argument they had days before the murder centered on money and control. John had threatened to cut David off, a move that would leave him destitute. David's dependence on John created a deep-seated hatred that could have driven him to murder. The detectives also considered the possibility of a joint effort between Emily and David. Their affair, coupled with their financial motives, made them prime suspects. If they conspired together, they could both benefit immensely from John's death. Emily would gain financial freedom, and David would rid himself of his brother's dominance. One evening, Detective Miller received a call from a local bartender who claimed to have seen Emily and David together on the night of the murder. According to the bartender, they appeared to be in an intense conversation, their body language suggesting more than just a casual encounter. This new information put both Emily and David at the scene of the crime around the estimated time of death. Miller and Reynolds brought Emily in for further questioning. Confronted with the bartender's testimony, Emily's composure began to crack. She admitted to meeting David, but insisted they were discussing her troubled marriage and had nothing to do with John's death. David, on the other hand, was less forthcoming. When questioned about his whereabouts, he became defensive and evasive. His alibi, which had already been weak, now seemed even more questionable. The detectives pressed him on his relationship with Emily and the nature of their conversation that night, but David stuck to his story of innocence. Michael Turner also remained a person of interest. His frequent visits to Emily, coupled with his financial troubles, made him a viable suspect. In the midst of these revelations, the detectives encountered several red herrings. One such distraction came in the form of an anonymous tip, suggesting that John was involved in illegal activities. The tip claimed that John had been laundering money through his real estate business. While this lead initially seemed promising, further investigation revealed it to be unfounded. It appeared to be a deliberate attempt to divert the detectives' attention from the true motives behind the murder. Another false lead came from a disgruntled former employee of John's. The employee had a history of making threats against John and had been fired under contentious circumstances. However, after a thorough investigation, it became clear that he had no involvement in the murder. His threats were merely empty words born out of frustration and resentment. The turning point came when Detective Reynolds discovered a series of text messages between Emily and Michael. The messages revealed a rekindling of their romantic relationship and discussed plans to meet secretly. One message in particular stood out. Sent on the day of the murder, it read, "We need to act tonight. John can't find out." Armed with this new evidence, Miller and Reynolds confronted Emily and Michael separately. Emily broke down under the pressure, partially confessing to the affair but denying any involvement in the murder. Michael, however, maintained his innocence, insisting that the messages were taken out of context. The breakthrough in the case came when Detective Miller decided to take a closer look at the phone records and financial transactions. She believed that these would provide the concrete evidence needed to tie the suspects to the crime. The phone records revealed a flurry of calls and messages between Emily, David, and Michael in the days leading up to the murder. The communication pattern suggested a coordinated effort, with Emily at the center. On the night of the murder, there were several calls between Emily and David, as well as a brief call to Michael. This triangulation of communication placed all three suspects in contact during the critical hours. Miller also discovered an unusual transaction in Emily's bank account. A large sum of money had been transferred to an offshore account just days before John's death. This transaction, combined with the life insurance policy, suggested that Emily was preparing for a significant change in her financial situation. Armed with this new evidence, the detectives decided to confront Emily once more. This time they presented her with the phone records and the financial transactions. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Emily's facade of innocence began to crumble. Emily's voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't want it to come to this. I just wanted out. John was controlling, suffocating. I needed a way out, but I never wanted him dead." Miller pressed further. "Who did you talk to that night, Emily? Why were you and David in contact so frequently?" Emily hesitated, her eyes welling with tears. "David and I, we had a plan. We were going to leave John, start fresh, but I swear we never planned to kill him." The detectives knew they needed to hear David's side of the story. When they brought him in for questioning, David initially denied any involvement, but when confronted with the phone records and Emily's partial confession, his resolve weakened. David admitted to meeting Emily on the night of the murder, but claimed that their plan was only to confront John, not to harm him. Emily had convinced him that John would never let her go, and that they needed to make him understand that their relationship was over. Michael's involvement became clearer as the detectives reviewed his financial records. They discovered that he had received a substantial sum of money from an unknown source shortly after John's death. This payment, coupled with the text messages, suggested that Michael was part of the conspiracy. The detectives decided to bring all three suspects in together. In a tense confrontation, they laid out the evidence. Emily's breakdown, David's nervousness, and Michael's defiance created a volatile atmosphere. Miller addressed them. "We know about the affair. We know about the money. It's time to come clean. Who killed John?" Emily, tears streaming down her face, finally confessed. "It was an accident. We confronted John, things got heated, and David lost control. He didn't mean to kill him." David's face paled as he stammered, "It was self-defense. John attacked me and I just reacted. I didn't mean for it to end this way." Michael, realizing the gravity of the situation, added, "I was supposed to help them disappear after. I never thought it would go this far." The detectives had the pieces they needed. The confrontation had turned violent, leading to John's accidental death. Emily and David had panicked, and Michael had stepped in to help cover it up. The murder was a tragic result of a plan gone horribly wrong. With the confessions in hand, the detectives knew they had uncovered the truth. The case was far from simple, but the tangled motives and relationships had finally come to light. The truth was a web of love, betrayal, and desperation. The final confrontation with Emily, David, and Michael marked the culmination of weeks of intense investigation. Detectives Miller and Reynolds had pieced together the intricate puzzle of John Harrison's murder. The courtroom was packed as the trial of Emily, David, and Michael began. The community of Willow Creek, once known for its tranquility, was now a hub of media attention. Reporters and spectators alike were eager to hear the sordid details of the case that had shocked the town. The prosecution laid out a compelling narrative. They described how Emily's affair with David had rekindled old passions, and how their relationship had become a desperate escape from her controlling marriage. The prosecution argued that the financial troubles and the life insurance policy created a powerful motive for murder. Emily's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstances, a woman trapped in a loveless marriage who made poor decisions in a moment of panic. They emphasized that the murder was unplanned and that Emily had no intention of killing her husband. David's defense focused on self-defense. They highlighted John's aggressive behavior and his attack on David, arguing that David had acted out of fear for his life. They portrayed him as a man pushed to his breaking point by years of familial tension and resentment. Michael's defense was the most straightforward. They claimed he had no prior knowledge of the murder plan and that his involvement was limited to helping Emily out of misguided loyalty. He was depicted as an unwitting accomplice, caught up in a situation beyond his control. Throughout the trial, the detectives' meticulous work came to light. The phone records, financial transactions, and confessions all painted a vivid picture of the events leading up to John's death. The jury listened intently as the prosecution and defense presented their cases. On the stand, Emily was a picture of remorse. She recounted the night of the murder in vivid detail, her voice breaking as she described the confrontation with John. Tears streamed down her face as she spoke of her regret and fear. "I loved John," she said, her voice trembling, "but I felt trapped. When David and I confronted him, everything spiraled out of control. I never wanted this to happen." David's testimony was equally emotional. He described the years of living in John's shadow, the constant feeling of inadequacy, and the moment of terror when John attacked him. "I just wanted to protect myself," he said, his voice cracking. "I never meant to kill him. It was an accident." Michael, in his testimony, admitted to helping Emily cover up the murder, but insisted he had no part in the actual killing. "I made a terrible mistake," he said. "I thought I was helping a friend, but I realize now how wrong I was." The prosecution's closing argument was powerful. They emphasized the premeditation involved in the affair and the financial motives. They argued that while the murder might not have been meticulously planned, it was the result of a series of deliberate actions taken by Emily and David. The defense's closing arguments focused on the emotional and psychological aspects of the case. They pleaded for leniency, highlighting the lack of premeditation and the complex web of emotions that led to the tragic event. After several days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Emily and David were found guilty of second-degree murder, acknowledging the crime's emotional context, but also the gravity of their actions. Michael was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact, his role in the cover-up undeniable, but his involvement in the murder itself less clear. As the verdicts were read, the courtroom was silent. Emily Harrison was sentenced to 20 years in prison. David Harrison received a 15-year sentence. Michael Turner, though less directly involved, was sentenced to 5 years for his role in the cover-up. The twisted love triangle that led to John Harrison's murder had unraveled, but its impact would be felt for years to come. The truth, once uncovered, had brought justice, but it had also revealed the depths of human frailty and the devastating consequences of unchecked desires.